Tonight, February 13th at 6:30, and if you'll join me, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I love that, Jacob. You were saying the pledge too. I appreciate that.
Oh, of course. Thank you very much.
Very good. Okay, and we'll start with a roll call.
Bartlett.
Yes.
M. Cortade. Cook.
Here.
Walters. S. Cortade.
Here.
And Friend.
Here.
And noted absent and excused is Mr. Lyle.
Okay, on the agenda first, we have review for conflict of interest. Does anyone declare a conflict? I declare a conflict with the Holiday Woods Special Assessment District. I live in that neighborhood. So would there be a motion and support for accepting that declaration of a conflict of interest?
So moved.
Motion by S. Cortade, supported by Walters. Any further discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. And then is there a motion and a volunteer to chair that portion of the meeting?
I volunteer Walters to chair the meeting.
Is there support?
I'll support it.
Okay. Motion by S. Cortade and support by Tracy Bartlett to have Walters lead the discussion for the Special Assessment District. You should be good timing-wise.
Okay, as long as,
Yeah, you should be. Okay, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we move forward. Approval of the agenda. Tonight on the agenda, you'll see we have the traditional consent calendar with a number of items on business before the Township Hall. We have a public hearing for Holiday Woods Special Assessment District. We have East Bay Ambulance, which has some grants that were awarded, as well as some purchases and an offer of employment. We have the short-term rental discussion, a bottomland conveyance for Alexandra Inn, site plan review, site condo for Holiday Forest, cluster development, and the National Flood Insurance Program ordinance introduction. I would like to move from the consent calendar the bottomland conveyance number 4 and just put that, do we have anybody here for that item?
Josh was out in the...
Oh, not for Alexandra, for TC Water Sports. Okay, we'll put that last. After the flood insurance program, we will put bottomland conveyance for East Bay Development Group, LLC, TC Water Sports, LLC, and Sugar Beach Resort Partners, LLC, last on the agenda. And then, yeah, so with that, any comments on the agenda? Is there support for the agenda presented?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
or,
Motion by Cook, support by Walters to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have an agenda. With that, we will come to public comment. We will accept public comment for a short-term rental ordinance at the time of the agenda item. So that is 8C on the agenda. I do want to switch a little bit of that order around. I apologize. I did want to move D and E to before the short-term rentals. Does anybody on the board have an issue with that order? Okay, so we will do the public hearing for the Special Assessment District, East Bay Ambulance, then we'll do the Alexandra and Bottomland Conveyance, Holiday Forest, then the short-term rental ordinance, then the flood insurance ordinance introduction, and then the Bottomland Conveyance for East Bay Development, TC Water Sports, Sugar Beach. All right. So again, as I mentioned, public comment for short-term rentals should be held till that agenda item. And let's see, also for the Holiday Woods Special Assessment District, your comment should be held until the actual public hearing during that agenda item. And other than that, I think we're good. Ann, if you want to read the
Sure.
directions for public comment?
The purpose of the public comment is to give members of the public an opportunity to express their views and opinions to the members of this commission. To maintain order and ensure fairness to every speaker, the following rules must be followed during public comment. Speakers will approach the podium and introduce themselves by stating their name and address, and then proceed to make their comment. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes and is only allowed to speak once on the same matter. Communication previously emailed to the commission is not necessary to be read aloud. Public comment time may not be given to another member of the public. Any arrangement for speaking on behalf of others must be arranged prior to the meeting. When your time is at 2 minutes, 30 seconds, you'll be alerted with a yellow signal to wrap up your comments. And at 3 minutes, you'll be alerted with a red signal, and the chair will ask you to conclude your comments.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we will open up for public comment. Anybody wanting to address the board, please feel free to step up and address the board. Okay, we will move on to our other agenda items. Correspondence and reports. You do have a couple items in your correspondence and reports. You have about 3 newsletters from Norte on housing and also the PAR plan. You have a local government advisory team memo and the treasurer's report. And then as well, you have links to the various meetings of the past month or so. Any questions on any of that? Okay, that takes us right down to already page 49 of our agenda. So, Ann, we'll have you read the consent agenda if you wouldn't mind.
Certainly. The purpose of the consent agenda is to expedite business by grouping non-controversial items together to be dealt with by one board motion without discussion. Any member of the board, staff, or the public may ask that any item on the consent agenda be removed and placed elsewhere on the agenda for full discussion. Such requests will be automatically respected. If any item is not removed from the consent agenda, the action noted in parentheses on the agenda is approved by a single board action adopting the consent calendar. This evening, you have the minutes of January 9th, 2023 regular meeting. Recommend approval. From the general fund, check numbers 17626 through 17703, the amount of $113,232.72, with check number 17673 voided. From the emergency fund, check numbers 5202 through 5236, in the amount of $58,353.84. Receiving fund, check numbers 2890 through 2890, paid in the amount of $317.98. The escrow fund, check numbers 1900 through 1911, paid in the amount of $85,817.37. There was nothing paid from the road SAD funds. The payroll dated January 1st through January 14th, check number 7495 through 7497, totaled $54,679.65. And the payroll dated January 15th through January 28th, check number 7498 through 7500, totaled $58,308.69. There was a payroll dated January 12th, Parks Commission, December pay, which included check number 7494 in the amount of $772.35. Total payroll, $113,760.69. Total amount paid, $371,482.61. There are no budget adjustments at this time. And other items, the Sedum Fellowship Memorandum of Understanding, a copier purchase, poverty exemption income guidelines and asset test resolution. Number 4 got moved off, and resolution documenting updated fees from January 2023 meeting. There's also another set of minutes, February 7th, 2023 joint meeting minutes. Recommend approval.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Anne. So a couple things on the other items for the consent agenda. As Anne noted, we did pull off the TC Water Sports Resolution documenting Eagle-approved bottomlands conveyance. We moved that to the end of the agenda. The CEDAM Fellowship Memorandum of Understanding and the Poverty Exemption Income Guidelines from the original packet. You can see the updated packets that additional information did go out. I'm happy to pull those or keep them in there. They were pretty simple items with the CEDAM. It was simply removing the indemnification clause and updating or clarifying the employment language based on the legal counsel, and that's in the cover. And the poverty exemption income guidelines was just set at 5,000, and our previous guideline was 3 times the income level, and so I changed it back to the 3 times the income level to be consistent with our current. So I'm happy to pull those two, but those were the 2 changes. Let's see, also on the fees that are in the consent calendar, you will notice that, let me put my finger on the page here for a second. It is on page 102. You'll see that the commercial multifamily, which is almost at the end of page 102, that's listed as 1,000. That's that same typo that we had in January. So that has been corrected or will be corrected to the 1,150. And then the PUD developments were actually, is Claire in here? I think they were listed lower in January. They were actually at 1,000 before that. So then they've been updated to be consistent for the 1,150. So there are those 2 changes, the 1,150 for PUDs and the 1,150 for the commercial multifamily ZBA appeal. So with those, we do start on Resolution 2023-03 today, and so we will number the amount of resolutions that we end up passing with the consent calendar in conformance with that. So with all of that, would anyone from the board like to remove anything from the consent agenda? Okay.
I had one correction
Sure.
to the minutes.
Okay.
of, January 9th, 5C. I think we just kept the previous, I don't know if it was cut and paste. It says auditing services, 2022 through 2025 auditing services. And I think it should just be the Holiday Woods at the end of that.
Yep, page
title.
5 of the supplemental packet. Okay, we can just strike that when we go to approve them. Do you see that,
It
Sue?
was just a typo.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you for that. All right, with that, is there any member of the public who would like anything removed from the consent agenda? Okay, we will bring that back to the board for discussion. The poverty exemption will be Resolution 2023-03. The resolution documenting the fees will be 04. And is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Support.
Okay, a motion is made by Walters and support by Cortade. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote, Ann?
Walters.
Yes.
S. Cortade.
Yes.
Cook.
Yes.
M. Cortade.
Yes.
Bartlett.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes. Okay, great. So we're moving along, because we do have a full agenda, to business before the Township Board. First on the agenda is the public hearing for the Holiday Woods Special Assessment District. And following that number, that'll be 2023-03. And with that, I will leave and turn it over to Mindy.
Can I ask for clarification before you go? Because we use 2023-03 for the poverty exemption, shouldn't it be 2023-05?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I misread. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on, I gotta get my papers.
I know. It's like-
would like to bring the Hollywood Special Assessment District up. As you are aware, we talked about this at the January 9th board meeting and approved resolution 2023-01 to receive a petition to create a special assessment district and declare an intent to create a district. The public hearing is scheduled for today. This public hearing will allow us the board to discuss and consider Resolution 2023-05, and that's a resolution creating the East Bay Township Hollywood's Assessment District, ordering creation of a special assessment role, and scheduling the public hearing on the assessment role. The budget implications of this are to just be discussed by the board. In the past, we have done up to 10% of the construction costs, but that is a discretionary spend, and we get to determine whether we're going to continue with that 10% or some other amount. Before I open the public hearing, are there any questions or comments of the board?
I don't know. Beth and I briefly talked a few minutes today. The township does have availability to finance this internally. It's $205,000, so, well, I don't even think it's that.
So we don't need to go out for a bond or
No.
do anything that way? It can all
No.
be done?
Yeah, the general fund has fund balance to be able to cover that, so.
And this
Won't
has
be-
been noted in the paper twice. It was sent to all property owners of record. There was a time for them to be able to reach out. I have not heard from anyone, one way or the other.
Okay. With regards to the public hearing, we're going to stay with the same rules that you heard from the original public hearing as we opened the meeting. If you would like to have a comment with regards to the special assessment district for Holiday Woods, please come to the lectern, state your name and address for the record, and we would love to hear any comments that you have.
Good evening. I'm Bruce Moore, 3363 Summerleaf Drive. I live in the area that would be affected by the Special Assessment District. I am strongly in favor of creating the Special Assessment District. Our roads are at that sweet spot where we've gotten a lot of use out of them, but if they are not repaired in the near future, it'll be basically grinded up and replace it at a dramatically higher cost. So I hope that you do approve the Special Assessment District. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Anyone else with regards to the Hollywood Special Assessment District? Okay, I will close the public hearing at this time. Is there any conversation of the board?
You said you've already got a price, a quote for this work?
That's what the 205
Okay.
represents, yeah. And
Can I correct that?
I don't know who said that.
I'm Jim from the Road Commission.
And
Can you
come up to
the
this.
lectern, please?
I'd just like to correct that. We do not have a formal quote at that. That's our initial estimate, pre-design estimate. So we're pretty sure that that's accurate, but just wanted to make sure that you knew that that is not anything that we have firmly in hand.
It's what we normally have at this point in time. We don't always have the final at this juncture of the process.
When do you anticipate taking this out for bid?
Probably in May,
Okay.
okay? And we've got several contractors of similar type of work that are going to be available this summer. and we may want to see about folding this into that, save money and save some speed on advertising and bid, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Okay, so this would be scheduled to go to a second public hearing at our March meeting at the earliest. But at that point, we still wouldn't know if we have firm prices of 205 or if it changes. So we could, at that point in time, put it on the shelf until it comes, hold the public hearing, have the public be able to give their comments. The board would take an action if they chose to move forward after that second public hearing. It would be, if more than 10%, we would need to bring it back.
That was the number I was thinking, 10%. If it's more than 10%, it has to come back to the board.
Right,
Correct?
correct. Thank you, Jim. We appreciate the clarification.
Any other comments of the board?
Would we still intend to do kind of the same that we did on some of the other SADs with Wade Trim doing some project management?
I would assume so, yes.
I would expect so, that they would work on our behalf.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a very overwhelming petition drive. The folks that have the interest did make some good foot traffic, so it was a very strong request.
Have you seen any negatives?
No.
Okay.
I mean, there's been no comment, but you can't assume no comment is negative.
No, I'm just wondering if there's anybody who's actually said no.
Right.
Anybody would like to make a motion with regards to this resolution?
Okay, so it's two-part. So I move to schedule a second public hearing for the Holiday Woods Special Assessment District for the road improvement project, which will include 1.5 inches, and I'm going to say it wrong, bituminous,
Bituminous.
thank you, overlay on chip interlayer over existing pavement within Hollywood subdivision, which includes the roads of Autumn Leaf, Summer Leaf, Winter Leaf, Spring Leaf, and a portion of Village Circle, and properties outside of Hollywood subdivision that have frontage on Village Circle Drive where it extends west to reach Holiday Village Road, Summer Leaf Drive where it extends to reach Yorkshire Drive, and Spring Leaf Drive where it extends to reach and include the south approximately 100 feet of Columbine Court, and to approve resolution number 2023-05, the resolution creating the East Bay Charter Township Hollywood Special Assessment District, ordering the creation of the special assessment roll and scheduling the public hearing on the assessment roll.
Support?
Motion by Cortez, support by Cook. Any questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Escorted.
Yes.
Cook.
Yes.
Walters.
Yes.
Bartlett.
Yes.
M. Cortez.
Yes.
Okay, I also make a motion that the Township's board stay with our recommended 10% of the total cost is sharing
10% of the construction cost?
of the construction cost. Thank you for the clarification.
Support?
Motion by S. Cortez, support by Cook. Any other discussion?
I don't, that's fine, but I always thought it was just originally started out as 10% of the engineering cost, or part of the engineering cost, but maybe I don't remember it right, so.
I think it's, I thought it was just the construction, but I think,
From what I
haven't looked at my
remember,
spreadsheet in a while, so.
From what I remember, it was construction cost. I know the road commission changed their
This is
portion.
under their old
Right.
process. So they will do 25%.
So the road commission's going to do 25% on this one? And then we are potentially going to do 10% on
Of the
this?
construction.
In the new program, the road commission will do the engineering costs and none of the construction costs, correct?
That's my understanding.
My understanding.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, we have.
Thank you, Jim.
We have a motion and a support. Any other additional questions? All in favor? Do we need roll call?
Let's do a roll call.
Okay, that's fine.
Escorted,
Yes.
Cook,
Yes.
M. Cortade,
Yes.
Bartlett,
Yes.
Walters.
Yes.
Friend can come back.
Okay, very good, thank you. Barely had time to finish my Amazon order there. You were so quick. No, I'm kidding. Okay, we will move on with East Bay Ambulance. Nick Lemkool, our medical director, is here. Thank you, Jim, for being here. Have a good evening. Drive safe. Hi, Nick, how are you doing?
Everybody, great.
So we have a couple things. You want to start to go through them?
Sure. The first thing up, we put in at the last minute, couple 2% grants like we normally do. We didn't get a chance to bring them to the board beforehand, so basically, we got 2 grants, one for a Lucas that we've talked about in the past that you haven't gotten yet, and then 50% of a cardiac monitor replacement. So the first part is just a motion motion to accept the 2% awards is what we're looking for out of there. A little less than what we originally projected when we budgeted, just because the cost came in less than what we needed. And then we got that Lucas grant, which was not projected in our budget either.
And I kind of over-projected on the Echo
Yeah,
at 70.
But
I don't-
budgeted high.
We did. But still, it's all very good news. So the motion would be to accept the grant funds from the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, allocation of 2% fund grant cycle of $18,434.81 for the Lucas replacement, and $21,119.48 for cardiac monitor replacement, for a total award of $39,554.29.
So is that your motion?
Unless you would like it to be.
I can support it or make it, whichever way.
Either is just fine. Motion by S. Cortade, support by Walters. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by no? Okay, great. Thank you for putting in those grant applications. That was fabulous, and we're very thankful, too, for the ARPA funding as well of the $35,000. Okay, next thing on your agenda.
So the second thing is about that ARPA funding. I was able to track down, we've talked about this Echo for a while, I was able to track down a Tahoe in Pennsylvania that is new. It would come upfitted. The one thing different that we have is I wasn't able to get 3 quotes just because of the current vehicle market. And a lot of them just laugh at you when you tell them you're looking for a truck anyway. So we're asking for some flexibility with that and then proceed with this purchase. You'll notice that the request is a little bit higher than what was budgeted. That was because it was a wild guess on where we would come in for a quote. The quote came back, we were a little bit over. And then we're asking for a little bit of flexibility, just kind of finalizing out everything to move forward with that.
Yes, but that 77,000 is over, and the amount that we think it'll come in at 73 and change includes all the lighting,
Yep.
pretty much everything but the stickers, right?
Don't even have that on there.
It will, okay. All right, very good. Are there any questions for Nick regarding this? I will say, we have experienced the same difficulty with purchasing vehicles through Metro and through the DPW, both. Any questions or a preference or a motion?
Make a motion to approve the purchase of the 2023 Chevrolet Tahoe and upfitting from 911 Rapid Response with a total cost not to exceed $77,000.
Okay, is there support?
Support.
Okay, motion by Walters, support by Cook. Further discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by no? Okay, thank you very much. We'll go on to the next item.
This next part's for the purchase of the Lucas and purchase of a Life Pack 15. With these, we're going to trade in one of the old cots I found in the pole barn. So for like $500, it's not a ton, but it's a little bit. And then for the life pack, we're going to trade in one of our old life packs for $6,500. So this is basically to make those as surplus and then purchase the life pack and the Lucas, both with the service plans like we've done in the past with the Stryker products. So they'll have that extra 5 years of coverage, or extra 4 years of coverage for a total of 5, just like we've done in the past with everything.
And then at the bottom of page 125 in your packet, you will see a small table that kind of puts all of these purchases together to kind of see what the impact is to the Fund 210. And really, it's not bad considering all of the equipment that we're putting in the field. And there's quite a few people, if I can pick on PT here too, who was excited when he heard about the Echo as well. Having been a CPO, he knows the value that'll provide to our emergency services. But you'll see that, again, that over budgeting on the Echo grant probably hit us a little bit because our revenue is not quite what we expected there, but our expenditures are only $1,000 over the total amount that we thought. So we're sitting pretty good with that. Yeah, so Nick is looking for a motion to approve and declare one Stryker manual cot and one LP15 as surplus and used for trade-in, and purchase the Lucas device and an LP15 with service plan as quoted from Stryker.
So moved.
Okay, support? Did you support? Motion by M. Cortade, support by S. Cortade. Further discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by no? Okay, and you have another agenda item. You're on a roll here.
So the next two kind of go hand in hand. I got an application for part-time employment from somebody that lives down in Grand Rapids. Currently, our employee manual says you have to live within certain counties in order to be able to work for the township. We're just asking for some flexibility with that, even if we decide that's just East Bay Ambulance. Sometimes we have to think outside the box for staffing, and out of this area, we're kind of running out of people to borrow and steal from other agencies. So we're just trying to think outside the box on how we can recruit some more people, and this might help us a little bit.
Okay, and so this is on page 23 of your supplemental packet, and there is the current policy verbiage and then suggested policy, which draws out the ambulances as different. Now, you'll remember, we're going through and doing a heavy revision of this personnel manual anyway, but we just thought, you know what, we're just going to kind of keep it all consistent and go ahead and put that in there anyway. So the motion would be to approve the suggested verbiage regarding the exception to the East Bay Charter Township Employee Manual to allow for East Bay medical personnel to reside outside the listed counties.
Well, what I like about it too is that you kept it, you're still requiring them to be from here with the exception of, we're not just opening it up to everybody.
Right.
So it's good.
Well, good, then would you like to
I'll
make the
make the
motion?
motion.
Is there support? Okay, the motion by M. Cortade and support by Walters. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by no? Okay, and then your last item.
The last one, I'm done
Nick.
after this, I promise. The last one is just an offer for employment as presented.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes, of course.
In reading the second sentence, is she currently paramedic, or does she need to
She is a
receive the
paramedic.
certification?
She is a paramedic.
Okay, that wasn't exactly clear, but,
I'm sorry.
no, it's okay.
Yeah,
It's
she
just that
comes-
she
she-
would quickly obtain medical
Yep.
control function,
So she doesn't have med control function, so all she's got to do is take a test through our med control and then do our orientation process, which she's going to have to do anyway. And then
Perfect.
she'll be able to practice as a paramedic.
Perfect. I make the motion to approve the hiring of Melissa, Dea,
Yeah.
Daw.
Da, as presented.
Okay, is there support?
Support.
Okay, motion by S. Cortade and support by Bartlett. Any further discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by no? Well, congratulations. I mean, this group was so easy on you today. No, actually, we really appreciate the work with the grants and the capital purchases. It's a lot of work to get all of that lined up, so thank you.
Thank you.
I have request,
Sure.
put these on the long-term capital improvement plan for their replacement, so that we always.
They're already on there.
Right.
And actually, I think we included that capital improvement plan
Page
in
119.
the first agenda item on the last page. So it kind of showed you where it fell, that those were already planned for this year's purchase.
And then the replacement.
Yep, and the replacement's on a cycle.
For that year's.
Yep. Every type of purchase that we have that's a capital is on a certain year cycle. So, awesome.
Makes life
Good.
easier later.
Thank you.
It does make life easier later.
Well,
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will move to the bottomland conveyance resolution for Alexandra Inn. This would be 2023-06, correct?
Yes.
And,
You want to give us a refresher on what?
yep,
page?
I can sure give you a page number. Hold on one second here. It is on page 156.
Thank you.
And what you have in your resolution, this is coming through Mansfield Land Use Consultants for Alexandra Inn. And Josh Werfel is here, correct, Josh? All right. You have, it is a resolution approving the application of conveyance for Great Lakes Bottomlands. You have the illustration and description of the concept dock plan, the conveyance overview, the application process, and the MCL. Let's see. Josh, do you want to add any comments to that? Have you taken a look at the packet? Or Dusty, very good. Hi, Dusty, how are you? Good. Things changed a little bit from when I talked to you on the phone and you said, when's that going to be on the agenda? I said, oh.
Well, thanks for moving us up. We appreciate it. Dusty Christensen with Mansfield Land Use Consultants here on behalf of Orful Resorts Alexandra Inn. As Beth mentioned in her introduction, this request is in front of you tonight simply for a resolution for the use of the Great Lakes Bottomlands in East Bay in front of the under construction Alexandra Inn. We currently have a joint permit application into Eagle and the Army Corps for the permitting of a dock for use by hotel guests. And differences from some of the resolutions that you've seen in front of you and dock plans that you've seen in front of you in the past are that this dock doesn't have any boat slippage associated with it. So it's simply a dock to allow hotel guests to reach from the beach further out into the lake across the relatively shallow bottomlands of East Bay. And as you know, in that section of East Bay, the water depth is, a foot or two for hundreds of feet out from the water's edge. So this dock serves to allow better access to the public resource for the guests of the hotel. And you'll note that the township attorney and township staff worked with the resolution language a little bit to clarify some of the usage points within this resolution as compared to previous resolutions that you've reviewed in the past. But it's a pretty straightforward request, and we hope that you review it favorably. And if there are any questions, I can answer those.
Thank you. And the terminology that you're talking about that was wordsmithed with legal counsel and Claire Carner was item number 3 that talked about what usage would need to come back to the, or be pursuant to the zoning, and potentially come back to the planning commission. Correct, Claire? Okay. Any questions for Dusty or for Claire?
I guess I'd just like some clarification. So there will be a kayak rack opportunity. Is there going to be like a kayak launching station too?
Nope, just the racks that you see on the plan. And
Okay.
those are primarily just for storage of kayaks that are brought by guests of the hotel. The concern is that there's really no good place to store a kayak in a hotel room or on a balcony 3 stories up. So it gives the guests a place to store those while they're staying at the hotel.
So is there a boat washing station there or a kayak washing station, since those kayaks would be coming outside of the East Bay proper?
We don't have one on our plans, no.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I know where you're coming from, because we're requiring everybody else to have a washing station, and if you're setting up a rack intending for people to bring their boats,
If they're not theirs, if it's not the hotels, it is individuals bringing their own, we've required stations.
We've only
Wait, no,
required
we-
one
no.
at GoRec.
Been the topic,
short-term rental thing tonight, there's talk about having it in there too.
The AIS? It just says that they have to, we can get into that verbiage later, but it just says the people have to adhere to whatever AIS guidelines are out there federally. They have that, so it's not resting on the township, but it is state guidelines. And I think the only time I've known it to come up was obviously during the GoRec discussion, and that was before the township, I think, was involved much. That was really discussion between the neighboring property owners and the Rotary. And because I think that once it came to the township, it already had a boat wash. It doesn't on any of the other ones, and the homes, of course, don't have that.
No, and I might add too that many of those projects that you're discussing now have gone through special use permit processes, site plan review processes, and have those types of questions raised as they're reviewed for zoning compliance and compliance with other standards with county, local, and state ordinances. The request that's in front of you tonight is just for the leasing of the bottom land. So essentially, the EGLE permitting process for docks, specifically those at commercially related processes or properties, requires that the township sign off through a resolution to allow the private property owner use of the bottom lands for the dock itself. I'm not aware of any passages or verbiage within the zoning ordinance, which frankly doesn't apply to this request anyway, that would require a boat washing station, but as I mentioned before, we don't have one on the plans, and
Great.
I don't believe that will include one.
I appreciate that.
And I don't believe either through the conveyance or Eagle that is required of us, obviously, as you
No.
mentioned. However, I would say it would be great, very valuable for you to note to your developer who's here to listen, that we are concerned about that, and that is an issue. And so any education or information that they would have available, either whether that's a signage at the dock or information available in the hotel, would be beneficial.
Is there any plans for access control onto the dock, or is this just going to be a standard dock right off the beach?
It's a standard dock right off the beach. I'll note that there is a form of access control, and that essentially the entire width of the property is encompassed by the hotel building itself. So there's not a lot of opportunity for folks to wander in off the sidewalk, through the parking lot, past the building, and then out to the dock. But it's limited to hotel guest use only.
Okay. Just no concerns about there being a public park right next door with people that could kind of,
There is.
Use the-
I think that's going to be kind of I guess, a policing matter for hotel employees, just to ensure that hotel guests are using the dock, rather than folks spilling over from Jen's Park.
I think it actually ends up going both ways. I mean, it's a public park right next to a hotel. What happens is, the hotel, they actually do end up using our beach, believe it or not. As a matter of fact, I think it was the hotel on the other side had asked us when we were getting the grill upgrade. If you remember, we were doing an improvement a few years ago, and then we couldn't do it because of Eagle and the rising water. But that was going to include some picnic tables and barbecue grills, and they were wondering when those would go in. And actually, they thought that one was not there anymore, and some people had asked about it because they used it. So, we get the same thing. It just goes both ways. It's just part of what's there, I'm sure. And I think maybe even, we talked about, I think Claire might have maybe talked about with Josh, or maybe it was Bob Burns through Parks and Rec about, some people, they'll probably have some want to be diligent about watching and make sure that it is used by the hotel guests and not all of the park goers, but the same thing goes the other way. I mean, it's a public park.
I would make a motion to approve what resolution is this?
Six.
Sorry. 6. Resolution 2023-06, approving the application for conveyance of the Great Lakes bottomland.
Okay, is there support? Support. Further discussion? And so there is a motion to approve Resolution 2023-06, the conveyance of the bottomland.
Hey, Beth,
Yes,
this number 3, has this been looked at by the attorney?
yes. He's the one who was requiring it. Yeah. Motion to approve Resolution 2023-06, resolution approving the application for conveyance of the Great Lakes bottomlands. It's a resolution. Roll call vote, Ann?
Bartlett.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes.
Escortate.
Yes.
Cook.
Yes.
M. Cortate.
Yes.
Walters.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Dusty, thank you for
Thank you
being
very
here.
much.
Okay, with that, we will move on to site plan review, or Holiday Forest 2 residential cluster condominium subdivision. Claire, do you want to go over that information from the Planning Commission?
Page 169.
Yep, so it starts on 164 of your packet. So this development, and we've got Bill Crane here, representing the applicant, but this has been in front of the Planning Commission a number of times over the past several years. Most recently, it was approved in 2021 by the Planning Commission as well as the Township Board. There's some unique topography on the site, and I think anyone that's seen it before, I think that you'll see that that's a big part of the reason that it hasn't developed. I think the first time it was developed or approved was back in, I think, the mid 2000s. Mindy would know better than me.
Early 2000s.
What?
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s. So what was approved by the Planning Commission most recently is 34 residential units. They're using the cluster development tool under Section 226 of the ordinance, and so that's basically allowing, with additional open space preservation, it allows smaller parcel sizes as well as reduced width of the parcel. And so that was an attempt to make this a more feasible development site. The ZBA also approved a variance for the private road width, the right-of-way, from 66 feet down to 30 feet. That was reviewed by the township engineer. They recommended or required upon approval of the variance that there's utility easements on either side of 20 feet. So that variance was approved by the ZBA, and then the site plan review came in front of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission unanimously approved it in January at their last regular meeting. And one of the requirements is that there will be no future variances for the front setback. So the road right-of-way variance was kind of an attempt to make this site developable, but they wanted to make sure that there wasn't kind of this, there wasn't future variances that would greatly reduce the setbacks and make the driveways too short, can lead to safety issues. So I went and took a look at, the length of driveways of kind of some of our older post-World War II subdivisions. These are very consistent with the length of the driveways, so I am comfortable with kind of this development pattern, the length of the driveways fit, vehicle in it. And so happy to answer any questions, and Bill Crane is here as well, you'll see that there was 6 recommended conditions by the Planning Commission at their January meeting. Those are all in the minutes. There's also the staff report that documents all of the standards, and all of the standards have been satisfied unless they're highlighted in red, and all of those have been integrated into the recommended conditions. And then there's also the site plan included as well, so.
Okay, so those conditions are on page 178 of your packet. So you'll see the recommendation with those 6 conditions. Okay, Bill, did you want to say anything before we went on to any questions?
No, got it covered, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for being here tonight, though. I just have 2 quick comments. One is, I see this red area here on the west side, and I believe that that is a path connection over to the Holiday Woodlands Natural Area, which is township-owned property. I'm glad to see that you have integrated that, because otherwise, we just have future aggravated residents with people cutting through their property. So having that specific easement through there is a good thing. And the other thing, and I wouldn't dream of tying this up because of that, because it's not, I can't do that, nor would I, because it's not your issue. But I do worry about how we are developing all with these private roads. The Road Commission no longer accepts public roads, and so every development must be with private roads. This one in particular, the way it's just sandwiched in there perfectly for a public road, in my opinion, I worry about that. And as we are getting more and more public or private roads, subdivisions of those private roads, we are going to have a tremendous amount of special assessment districts in a decade or so. And that does concern me as we're looking at projects. But again, that's the Road Commission's decision and not, under our purview, so to speak. But that does...
To note.
Right. Something if we could, work on that in the future. Anyway, other comments by other board members?
I'll just say that this was a collaborative effort, putting this together. Like as Claire mentioned, it was approved, but, Bill came back and said, I can't build this. It's not financially viable how we put this together, and said, I gotta have X units before I can build it. And then, we basically told him no, and then the cluster was found, and we figured out how we could get the cluster and the zoning to work with the property to get what they need, what we need. There was some back and forth. There was some discussions and some pushing, and I think that it turned into a project that is going to be good.
Well, good, that's good to hear. Other comments, questions?
Do you have a copy of is that in the packet?
Yeah, it's on page
We got it.
169 is this little map,
183.
and then, yeah.
We only got parts of it.
It's like three or four pages.
We don't have the full site plan.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't copy yours, so here you are. There you are. Who else would have a newer one?
I've got a large copy over here.
Excellent, thank you, that would be terrific.
So connection point on the, this is actually the existing water tower, East Bay Township water tower. Connection on the east side, connection on the west side, with a future stub that actually goes to the south. This is the connection to the park.
Okay.
We have an access point to the open space located here. An access point across the bottom that connects both of those open areas. And then it actually wraps around so you can actually get up to the township park on the west side also.
Good. Thank you.
Does anyone need to see that up closer or need to see the smaller
Well, just
version?
the road thing, it threw me for a loop. They're not a 66-foot road right-of-way, but what size road is this going to be?
The right-of-way is 30 feet, but also with that, we have a 20-foot wide utility easement on either side because it will be an extension to the public water and sewer system of East Bay Township. So what that does is the road width is 24 feet, but the right-of-way is, the easement is 30. And then we have an additional 20 foot on the south and the north to account for public sewer and water.
So you still have basically a standard road with this surface area?
That's correct, yes. Yeah, the road surface will remain the same as the existing that we tie into, but just the easement itself is just narrower.
Okay.
So are the-
What did you say in the ZBA meeting? I remember this from a couple of months ago. You said this hatched area in front of that unit 58?
Yes,
is
this
what?
will be the pump chamber, which will be for the sewer. Everything's, for the new development, will be gravity fed down to this point, and then it will be pumped up to an existing manhole in this area, then it'll gravity feed from there to the north.
So are the easements on either side of the road?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So I thought you were pointing to the backyards, and so I was
Yeah,
like-
sorry, I missed my, yeah.
That's
so
okay.
road, and then the easements will be
Okay.
on the north side and south side of the 30-foot easement.
Claire, with the changes to the right-of-way width, does that change anything relative to landscaping requirements and street trees and?
No, and one of the conditions that was in a previous approval by the Planning Commission back in 2021 was the requirement for street trees to be as these homes are built out, and so that remains in this approval.
Okay, so on page 164, you do have a possible motion that includes the, thank you, that includes the recommendation and the 6 conditions that are listed on page 178. Are there other questions or potential motion?
Claire, do you want to add the street trees as a condition now, or?
You can, yeah, you're welcome to add them. They're in the staff report and the findings that were tied to the Planning Commission, but,
It just, would it be easier instead of having to dig if they're here?
if you want to. And I don't think that would hurt. I think that would, if anything, would be helpful.
Was it 3?
There's one at each property line,
There's
so
only
it's
1 tree?
2 per, yeah.
Well, but were those, did you say they're in the staff draft findings of fact? Okay, and that this recommendation is subject to that?
Yeah, I know, I just wanted to make it easier for
But
them to.
it's not a condition.
It's not a condition, so that I just would want, and it is in there, it's just that it might take a while for somebody to dig out and say it's there, so if we put it
Historical
as a
purpose.
condition here, it's just easier to find. So I will make a motion, where did my motion go?
164.
You could tie it back to the site plan as dated.
I'll make
Someone
a
to
motion to approve site plan review 11-22 Holiday Forest 2 residential cluster condominium subdivision, subject to the Planning Commission finding of facts and 6 conditions as listed in the January 3rd, 2023 Planning Commission, and adding 1 additional condition, and that condition being, oh dang it, I just found it. Street trees will be added between street and right-of-way per Planning Commission 2021 direction and the site plan.
Okay, is there support for that motion?
Support.
Okay, motion by Walters, support by Cook. Any further discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed by no? Okay, very good. Thank you for your work on this, Claire. Thank you. And we will Move on to short-term rental ordinance amendment discussion. Claire, I will let you, and Jacob Whitty with Fahey Schwartz is on the line with us here virtually. Do you want to come up, Claire, for a sec? And maybe kind of introduce?
Sure. Yeah, I've got, Jake Whitty is here, and I'm going to let him go through the bulk of the edits that are presented in front of you, but you'll see in this, in the memo from Jake and I dated February 13th, 2023, we summarize the amendments to the draft ordinance that are based on that November 14th discussion that the board had. And you'll see there's 12 of them, so Jake is going to go through those. And then you'll see there's also a summary of all the changes that were reviewed in November and in previous months that are still in this draft ordinance. And so that is 17 different changes. So we've just been continuing to track them just so the board has documentation of those proposed changes. So Jake will go through the new edits that have been added based on board discussion November 14th. He's also going to go through the draft policy that his firm put together to reflect the board's discussion about as licenses become available and a process for noticing those in an equitable manner.
Okay, great. And Jacob, when you were done with your overview, then we will open it up to public comment. So go ahead, Jake.
Okay, sounds good. And thank you all very much for accommodating me virtually. A
Jacob
little
is a
sad that
new
I can't
dad.
see you in person, but I
new
appreciate
dad,
the
right?
flexibility.
Jacob,
Yeah,
a new dad with of a 2-month-old, 1-month-old?
a little bit over 2 months.
Oh, good, congratulations.
So that's why virtual. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
No, thank you so much. So I'll just kind of quickly breeze through the amendments, the most recent round of amendments, and I can take questions as we go if there's any clarification you need. The first relevant amendment was to section 5, sub F4, and that just clarified a little bit as to how that policy, which I will discuss later, is going to be made available to the public and approved by the Township Board. I believe there was some concern about, not having board oversight on how that policy is promulgated. So the way this is set up, it's still developed by the Office of Planning and Zoning, but then the final approval of the policy goes to the board. The second edit was to section 6, subsection P. And that was just to clarify how we are measuring this separation distance. I think we kind of went back and forth between measuring from the address point versus measuring from the property line. I think at the last meeting, and a lot of things have happened since then, so forgive me if my recollection of what happened at the last meeting is not 100% accurate. But I think the general consensus was that we wanted to measure from the address point so as not to, unreasonably prejudice people with very large properties from renting, even though there's not really anyone close to them. So that was amended to reference the address point. I would like to, so the next edit is in section 6, subsection C, and this is, I think, something where it would probably be helpful to have some of your feedback, because what I included was a placeholder, but my job is kind of to give you the tools to accomplish the objectives that you want to within the boundaries of the law. It's not so much to decide policy, although I suppose there's a chance that I might have accidentally stumbled onto what you would think is an appropriate policy. But we talked about, how do we address kind of the concerns between overcrowding, but then also accommodating some flexibility in living spaces. Like if there's a family renting out a house, is it unreasonable for, a mom and a dad with a kid? Like, do they have to get a 2-bedroom house? Or if it's a 1-bedroom house with a pullout, is that acceptable? And so the addition to the occupancy requirement in 6C kind of tries to find some sort of balance where there is a number of guests permitted that is equal to 2 per bedroom, and then there's kind of a additional bonus floating occupancy that scales with how big the house is. And that's kind of to reconcile, you know, maybe there's more than 2 people staying in a bedroom, maybe there's, you know, sleeping accommodations in common areas. So that is, and I wanted to add, I think I have, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4 different kind of tiers, I guess, of occupancy. I don't know if that's more complex than you guys want, but I figured if you wanted to do a simpler approach, that would be easier to do within this language. You know, you can just kind of adjust how it scales as you see fit. But I think the idea was, you know, it doesn't necessarily make sense to only have 2 extra guests for, like, you know, a 6-bedroom house. But we also don't want to have 6 extra guests for a 1-bedroom house. So kind of scaling the occupancy to fit those scenarios in a reasonable way. And I don't know if you want me to just keep on pushing through all these amendments, or if we want to kind of open it up for board discussion. I mean, this is something specifically that I think there's.
Why don't you go
some
ahead and
practical
go ahead and go through them, do the overview, and then, like I said, we'll do public comment from there.
Okay, sure. So there's the framework for the occupancy. Section 6J, I know there were some minor concerns about wastewater. I think specifically with maybe porta-johns and privies and stuff like that. But we've just clarified this to say, you know, you have to have a fully functional septic system. It needs to meet the minimum requirements of the Grand Traverse County Health Department. That'll preclude any kind of temporary outhouse type situations. Another change to section 11. This is the exception to the transfer requirement that was discussed. I think the idea was that there wanted to be some accommodation of, like, legacy rentals that have been passed down through families, and wanting to exempt those kind of transfers from the general transfer provisions in the ordinance, which would otherwise treat a transfer as, you know, essentially at that point the permit would be considered revoked, because we're ordinarily not letting them be transferred in hopes of ameliorating these uses. But this kind of carves out a narrow exception to, you know, transfers to immediate family members, as the board was concerned about. The other kind of related concern there with ownership of these short-term rentals was related to, you know, how do we control STRs being held by LLCs and tracking those related to a specific individual rather than an LLC. That resulted in a minor update to section 5 sub B sub 1, where we added language saying, you know, if there is a corporate entity who is owning the short-term rental, they have to have a signed affidavit from an individual corporate representative, basically saying that corporate representative will hold the license, not the LLC. The next next edit was just a small one to section 5, sub B, sub 11, with respect to parking. I think there were some questions about, how do we limit parking for both the actual guests of the short-term rental and their visitors. And I know there were complaints, I think, that the township has seen in the past about people parking, on property that is not included in the short-term rental or parking in the right-of-way. And so the language here just basically says that all, vehicles and trailers and so on and so forth associated with the short-term rental needs to be parked solely on the short-term rental premises. So it's making sure that all of the parking associated with the short-term rental stays on that property. And then the last few changes, just kind of some minor housekeeping stuff, edits for consistency. There is a typo in section 5 sub D that was fixed. I also went through it and made sure that we used the term visitor universally. I think there were a couple sections where guest was used instead of visitor, and that could create ambiguity because visitor is a defined term. And then we also made a switch in section 5 sub D and E. We went from 10 business days to 14 calendar days, just so all the days in the ordinance are counted by calendar days. Again, less opportunities for confusion, more consistency, to the extent that is possible. And that is really all the substantive edits that were made in this last round of revisions.
Okay, do you want to do a brief overview of the policy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is really kind of my creation, and I'm happy for this to serve as a jumping off point. And I suspect that it, is probably something that will need to be amended by the Planning and Zoning Office, as well as, and approved by the Township Board, of course, as as time goes on, because this is, maybe a little bit more theoretical, although I think it's, certainly gives an idea of the process of how short-term rental licenses are issued. So there is the general intent and purpose behind this is to give kind of the nuts and bolts for how a first come, first serve STR license process works. So the first step is when a license becomes available. There are certain publication requirements that the township needs to follow for providing notice to the public that, hey, there is a, X amount of available short-term rental licenses. The notice to the public is also required to specify the application window and when applications can be received by the Office of Planning and Zoning and how they can be submitted. And then also give contact information, for the relevant person or people at the township who interested individuals can contact to get more information about the application process, how everything works. And then one thing I added as well, so recognizing that the township is probably not going to be losing a lot of licenses very fast and having to go through the notice and publication process multiple times a year. In the off chance that within this kind of, I think there's a 90-day window that we picked to circulate notice. If a second license becomes available, rather than create two application windows, there is an option for the township to circulate a second notice, creating relative to the same application window, but basically just saying that now there are, 2 licenses or 3 available, however many become available in that interim time. Following the posting of notice that I described herein, the next step would be submission of applications. Claire and I talked about this, and I think the most effective way, and it sounds like ideally the least controversial way for applications to be submitted would be through the township's host compliance software, because that I think provides a pretty exact timestamp as to when an application is submitted. So hopefully we will avoid, I guess, brawls outside of the township at 7:59 in the morning between applicants who are jockeying for position. This gives a way you can submit online. It just has to be, first come, first serve. So as long as your application is submitted timely, you have a good chance of getting it. It is as close as we can come to a perfect solution for first come, first serve, I think. There's a couple of like minor housekeeping things with how applications are processed by the host compliance software. There is some important limitations, including that there's can only be one application submitted per an applicant. Can only submit one application per proposed short-term rental location. So that'll avoid someone submitting applications, at 7:57, 7:58, 7:59, 8 o'clock, 8:01 to try to game the system. So there's a little bit of anticipation. We're going to say that if you do something, try to abuse the system, your application is just going to be treated as being rejected. The processing of applications, that happens when the application window expires. And I should add, right now we have a 12-hour application window. I don't know if that's probably more time than is necessary, given that I don't think there's going to be a lot of available short-term rental permits right away. But again, something that can be adjusted as time goes on. So there's the next step in the policy is the processing of applications, which is done by the Office of Planning and Zoning. And the idea behind these policy requirements is we want to kind of minimize the amount of work that is done. And so we kind of give priority to the first, however many permits are available. Those are that number is what is processed first. There is an initial review for completeness. If there are any deficiencies noted, then there is the standard 14 calendar days to correct the deficiencies, just as, is provided in the short-term rental ordinance. And then if, that application is not corrected within that time frame, it's deemed rejected, and then we go to the next one in line, so on and so forth, until we have a number of short-term rental licenses approved that's equal to the cap. And then with respect to application fees, I think as a matter of policy, what we landed on is that, every application needs to include an application fee, but the applications that are not processed by the Office of Planning and Zoning, they're basically just submitted, but they're too late, and so they're rejected. Where we landed on with that was that those application fees should probably be refunded, but if the Office of Planning and Zoning reviews the application, regardless of whether or not it's approved or rejected, then that administrative burden would justify having the application fee be non-refundable. I see a hand.
Is there a mechanism for those that are applying to know how many are in the queue ahead of them?
That is something that is beyond my understanding of the host compliance software.
That wouldn't show with the host compliance software. I don't believe, correct, PT?
Kind of yes and no. As it stands now for renewal, anyway, I can speak to, it comes through an order received. and so I can see when they came in.
Yeah, but the applicants can't see.
The applicants cannot see that
Yeah,
now.
that's what she was asking.
Yeah.
So, and to keep everyone in the loop, I mean, it's also a component of this policy that says, as soon as we have issued out enough permits to go back up to the number of the cap, then all the other permits that are, or applications that were submitted are deemed rejected. And then notice is provided via email and regular mail to each applicant whose or license application was rejected. And then the last component of that policy is that it can be amended by the Office of Planning and Zoning, but those amendments need to be approved by the Township Board.
Okay, well,
Which is-
oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, that's it.
Okay, well, thank you, Jacob, appreciate that. I think right now we'll hold questions here and we'll go to public comment. So now is the opportunity to make public comment with respect to short-term rentals. And we'll go by the same guideline and rules that Ann read earlier. So if you would like to come to the podium and give us your perspective under public comment, please do so. If you see somebody giving public comment and you are going to want to give public comment, just get in line right behind them so we can keep things going so that we can get you home at a reasonable time and not maybe driving on so much ice. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Good. Good evening. My name is John Jury. I live at 1615 East River Road. I would like to ask the board, there is a group of about 10 of us, and we would like to appoint a chair or a spokesperson for us and be allotted about 10 minutes.
Tonight, anything like that has to be prearranged. We're happy to do that, but that does need to be prearranged.
Okay, so we will give up, the 10 of us will give up our 3-minute allotment for this spokesperson to give you 10 minutes.
This evening?
This evening.
We
Otherwise, we're going to have 10 people at 3 minutes. So, you're 10.
Who are the 10 individuals? I don't see 10.
There's two on this side.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm sorry, one just went up there. So 5, 6, 7. All right, so go ahead, Mr. Drury. The rest of you, if you've raised your hand, please go ahead and sit down, and Mr. Drury is going to make your point for you.
I'd like to cede to Mark Clark, our representative. Thank you.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Thanks very much. My name is Mark Clark. I am an attorney in Traverse City with the law firm of Traverse Legal, and I know that the board has received a letter relative to the short-term rental ordinance by some of these folks that have raised their hand on their behalf. I am in the process of being retained by about 19 short-term rental property owners who have some concerns with the proposed amendment. As a former municipal attorney for more than 20 years, I appreciate the board's challenges in the ordinance adoption process. I know there's lots of work that goes into it. I know there's lots of debate back and forth. People have different interests, and so I want to thank you for your efforts up front. But we do have some concerns that we'd like to address with the board. Because time is short and limited, I'd like to address the consensus top 3 issues of the group that I'm going to be representing to address with the board this evening relative to the amendments. Number 1 is the booking restrictions that have become more restrictive in your amended ordinance. The booking restrictions in Section 6, limiting owners to no more than 1 rental per week, essentially, is going to have a pretty drastic impact on some of these short-term rental owners. They do count on the level of income that they've been accustomed to relative to their short-term rentals in order to sustain their properties financially, and so this is a significant issue. To my knowledge, looking back over the history, I'm not aware of any legislative findings by the body or data that would justify this amendment or this reduction. We believe, in review of the proposed amendments, that it would not be a reasonable exercise of authority granted by law to the board to address a regulatory concern in relationship to the clear negative economic impact that it would have on the homeowners. We'd like the board to consider eliminating this amendment or grandfathering in those who are presently licensed and have become vested in the right to utilize the properties under the current scheme. The second issue that we believe is a significant issue is the proposed limitation in Section 11 and 5B on the transfer of permits for dwellings. I know that the board has carved out an exception for immediate family members, but the restriction in any event we believe is questionable. To limit the transfer to an immediate family member, we believe is a regulatory taking. It diminishes the value of the property on transfer for those who have historically utilized their properties in whole or in part for short-term rentals prior to the adoption of the ordinance. The restriction has the effect of reclassifying the property use on transfer of those properties, thus diminishing the value, and we believe is a regulatory taking of the property for which the township can potentially be monetarily liable. We would like the board to consider to simply allow transfer of permits provided that the transferee is otherwise qualified, or consider exempting license holders who began renting before the ordinance from this restriction in resolution or potential resolution of the issue. The other issue is relative to corporate entities such as an LLC. We think that by designating or forcing the LLC to designating a single individual, and those individuals may not be related as family members, essentially imposes an additional liability on that person as the permit holder. LLCs are generally formed to limit liability of the property owner or property owners, and we believe that the Michigan LLC Act affords those individuals an opportunity by statute to avail themselves of it, and I think that by imposing that requirement of singling out an individual as a permit holder exposes that individual to liability and is contrary to the purposes of the Michigan LLC Act. The last item is the wastewater disposal item that requires regular inspections. There's generally no opposition to making sure that septic systems and sewage systems are adequate for the required occupancy of a dwelling. But in fact, this particular provision will target short-term rental properties when there are already existing regulations that are required to have adequate septic and sewage systems based upon the occupancy of those dwellings. And we believe that simply enforcing that already exists is adequate to address the wastewater disposal issues. Of course, any servicing or repair of a sewage or septic system can be a daunting and expensive and time-consuming exercise, and we'd like the board to consider imposing or placing some regulations in that ordinance that would grant some latitude so that permits are not revoked simply upon a violation, but that in order to suspend a license, there has to be some immediate health hazard associated with the violation before any drastic action is taken. There's a very genuine concern that if somebody has an inspection, comes up with a problem, that's not an immediate health hazard, that they be given some latitude and that the ordinance address that. Finally, there are a number of provisions in the ordinance which we believe are in fact land use regulations that are disguised as police power regulations, and that those restrictions can only be adopted and regulated through the township zoning authority and process, and are subject to potential invalidation under the township zoning authority. The ordinance, in fact, appears to have been drafted by the zoning and planning department and consultants. And in order to impose land use regulations, it must be done under the zoning and planning process instead of the police power ordinance adoption process, which is occurring presently. My group of prospective clients wants to work with the township in order to be able to come up with an acceptable ordinance that meets the technical legal requirements that are required to impose it. And they would rather do that in advance rather than engaging in disputed litigation after the fact. And so on behalf of those folks, I'd certainly be happy to meet with township officials on these issues and the general issue that I mentioned relative to the land use aspect of these regulations at your convenience. And I would thank you for your time, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you. What was your name again, sir?
Mark Clark,
Mark.
810 Cottage View, Traverse City.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, very good. Mark, a couple quick questions for you. You mentioned the transfer of permit for the dwellings. You realize that under the current ordinance, there is no transfer of the permit?
I do realize that, and I think that's, my view is that that's a defect that emanates from the original adoption of the ordinance.
Okay.
As a land use, I believe that in part, this ordinance is a land use regulation, and I think that folks who were lawfully doing this prior to the adoption of ordinance do have some vested rights to be able to continue that, to continue to be able to do that going forward. So I appreciate the board's consideration of adding family members to the transfer process, but I think there are issues related to the restrictions as a whole. Certainly, my folks are willing to compromise, but those who have historically rented their properties prior to the adoption of ordinance would like to be able to continue to be able to transfer their property without losing the benefit of what they've done historically.
Okay. And another question for you. On the wastewater disposal, the current ordinance right now has that there must be inspection once every 3 years. And so this really hasn't changed other than it adds the phrase, it adds the sentence, all septic systems servicing short-term rentals shall be fully functional and shall meet the minimum requirements imposed by the Grand Traverse County Health Department.
Yes, and so I know that the added language also imposes some regulations which are fairly nonspecific. They use some examples, for instance, and that authority is delegated to an enforcement officer who will ultimately be responsible for deciding what meets the standard or what doesn't meet the standard. And so my folks are mostly concerned with perhaps an overly aggressive enforcement of that. The concern primarily is that if there is if there's an issue on inspection, that they not be subject to a swift either suspension or revocation of their license, and they be given adequate opportunity, absent an immediate health hazard, and those happen,
Sure.
to be able to fix the problem in a meaningful way. And again, since these are sometimes extensive repairs and cost money, to be given some latitude without having licenses suspended.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. I don't usually ask questions, but since, there are several people who, wanted you to speak, I wanted to try to get to, since those are kind of already existing in the language, I wanted to understand why you were pointing those out when there was similar language in the current ordinance. So I appreciate that feedback.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, additional public comment.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Renee Jacobson. I live at 4720 Bittersweet Lane. I have lived on Spider Lake for 36 years and have seen lots of changes. The worst is the increase of short-term rentals. I own 2 properties on Spider Lake and both have multiple STRs close by. My primary home is 70 feet from an STR and 3 other rentals are within 460 feet. These STRs routinely overbook on guests and are always full of rotating renters. The renters are loud, rude, drunk, and disorderly. Last summer at the rental within 70 feet of my home, the renters were so loud and drunk midday that I politely asked them to quiet down. Obscenities were yelled back at me, and no effort was made to comply with my request. I cannot call the owner to complain, as I was not provided with their phone number. My best friend rented that same house for a year, 30 years ago, and lived there with her husband and 2 sons. They were forced to move out because the septic routinely backed up and they couldn't use the laundry facilities. This septic was never updated, and now 8 people or more are there daily throughout the summer. Our bay water quality has deteriorated. It's choked with weeds, water lilies, and several feet of foul-smelling muck. Swimming is no longer possible. I have 4 rentals within 120 feet of our cabin on Spider Lake, including one next door. Again, noise, constant partying, and large number of guests are a problem. Also, limited parking exists, causing renters to park on the road, making navigating the road very difficult. I rented my cabin briefly before licensing regulations took effect. I was able to check on the renters frequently since I live on the lake, and I would discover large parties, drunken, disorderly people, more guests than were expected, which was overburdening my septic system. I felt horrible about the impact on my neighbors, so I stopped renting it. I could monitor my cabin closely, but most STR owners do not live nearby, and many live out of state, so close monitoring for bad behavior is impossible. Only immediate neighbors are given contact information, but sound carries on the lake, and the whole neighborhood is impacted. Also, immediate neighbors may be reluctant to call and complain, not wanting to cause hostility between their neighbor sharing a property line. I propose all neighbors within 500 feet of an STR should be given contact information to call in case of problems. The regulations proposed recently, such as one group of renters in 7 days, will encourage more families to rent and limiting the partying. I would like only 2 guests per conforming bedroom, as would be the case if a family lived there, no more than that. All septic systems of SGR should be up to code for number of bedrooms and be forced to be updated if not. This will slow the deterioration of the water quality. I wholeheartedly approve of the proposed spacing of rentals to 1,000 feet apart, so not to overburden the neighborhoods with too much noise, people, traffic, and partying, and for limiting the number of rentals overall. When we moved to Spider Lake 36 years ago to raise our family, it was quiet, safe, and had clean water for swimming. Now this is not the case. Just so a couple hundred people in East Bay Township, and a lot of these renters are on Spider Lake, can make large sums of money while inconveniencing their neighbors and destroying our lake quality. Shame on them. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Just the difference between your public comment and the smile at the end, sorry, got me off guard a little bit. Further public comment?
Ann, can I just have you make sure to give them?
Hi.
My name is Michael Jacobson, 4720 Bittersweet Lane. And I just want to let you know I strongly am opposed to short-term rentals, and I'm surprised you even allow them in the first place. Living near them can be rather unpleasant at times, and I encourage you to do everything you can to restrict them. First off, I think booking restrictions do need to be kept. And also, I have major concerns about water quality. I mean, if you're going to allow short-term rentals, septic systems need to be inspected, as you guys have proposed, and updated. And, you know, for the gentleman to state, if it's not an immediate health risk, is no excuse to not address it right away. No matter what the expense is, it needs to be addressed immediately. Like I said, I'm very concerned about water quality, especially on Spider Lake. That lake has 460 acres surface area, and there's over 10 miles of shoreline there. And the degradation in water quality in that lake is largely due, I think, in my opinion, to improperly maintained and not updated septic systems. So I do encourage you to do everything you possibly can to restrict short-term rentals. I mean, a lot of these things are taking place in areas that were zoned single-family residential. I mean, it's single-family residential, period. I don't think they should be allowed at all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment. Further public comment? How are you?
Good evening, Caitlin Polensky, Arbutus Lake. Thank you for the revisions you have made with the STR rewrite. It is very appreciated. One additional suggested change, if you choose to not require cabin courts to have a rental license, can you at least include them in the 1,000-foot distance requirement? A home next door to a cabin court could be purchased by the cabin court owner, and eventually a license could be acquired for an STR. Although that residential home would not be part of the actual cabin court, it would exaggerate the transient activity on that concentrated stretch of the road. Since cabin courts have similar effects to neighboring properties as STRs, could that limitation be put in place? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Further public comment? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll bring that back to Claire. Claire, did you want to go over, were you doing some further presentation information or? Well, okay, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead? Hi, Preston. How are you?
I am good.
What are you going to be going over for us this evening?
3 main points as you guys are working your way through the rewrite of the ordinance. I wanted to go over the enforcement process, some of the complaints that we've received, and then just some issues that are kind of still coming into the office a little bit. The bulk of this will be on the enforcement of the short-term rental ordinance. We have a process when there's an issue with a short-term rental. There's an opportunity to make a complaint on the website that then comes to my email. And then that gets investigated, and I'll go into that a little bit further. But in addition to that, and this information is not only for you, hopefully this will be helpful for those who are listening. If it's a incident or a situation that's in progress and needs to be diffused, right away to reestablish the peace of the neighborhood, I encourage law enforcement to be contacted. Our noise ordinance, for example, is enforced by law enforcement. And in addition to the contact with law enforcement, I recommend that the caller ask to see the officer. I have the intimate knowledge of how the average complaint goes when it's a noise complaint. If no one wants to be seen, that information is relayed to the officer that's responding. If the officer goes and in his or her discretion, they don't find a noise level to be obscene, they may or may not make notes in their in-car computer and they go on to the next call. That doesn't really do me any good as the enforcement arm of the ordinance, as I didn't know they were called, if that's not relayed to me, and then I don't know what the observations of the officer were. And so I recommend in our process for complaining about a short-term rental incident is if law enforcement is called, you ask to see a police officer, and if it's a reoccurring issue for a certain property, that you ask for a report to be made, and you obtain a complaint number from the officer as well as the officer's name and badge number.
That won't necessarily happen automatically, correct?
It will not automatically happen, no. In fact, quite the opposite. If an officer comes, investigates, a report is done, and I'm armed with the information of the officer and badge number, I can follow up with the sheriff's department. We have a good working relationship with them. And then the information that they observed, I can then take and run with to further my investigation that's done internally here. Certainly not every type of complaint warrants that, but that's an aspect that I think is overlooked quite a bit, is involving our law enforcement.
Preston, can I just ask a quick question? Yeah. You broke that down into some good pieces, but then you said rarely, if ever, when Beth asked you the question. So if a citizen calls, requests those things, and says, I'd like your name, I'd like your badge number, I'd like you to do, a incident number, do they have to comply? I mean, what kind of if they ask the question, is that the key to be able to get that to happen?
It is. Great question, Sue, and I confirmed this with speaking to Captain of the Sheriff's Department as well, is that, and I know this again by having done the job, if you ask to see me, if you ask to see the officer will come. We are required to identify ourselves. They provide that business card with, on the back, they'll write the incident report number. And then if you say, look, this is a reoccurring issue, I'd like a formal police report done, it will be done. If it's not done, in any police department from coast to coast, there are a lot of supervisors in any agency, and I was told from the captain that you inquire with a supervisor, where's this report? I asked for one to be done. So,
Thank you.
and, I think for the most part, if you ask, that will occur. Now, having said that, there is a property that's one of the three that's been complained upon regularly, and no formal reports were found to have been done, even though the complainant requested that. I don't have an explanation for that, but going forward, that is my advice, is that is certainly requested.
And that, Sue, just for clarification from your question, that's when you see the officer, not when you first call over the phone. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, exactly, I'm sorry, yep. When you see the officer. And I want to say this before I forget it. Super important, and I really want this information, is if you reached out to the manager of the property, whether it's the designated property manager or the owner, whose ever contact information is listed that is disseminated in the notice to the neighbors, the requirement to mitigate the issue within 2 hours is written in the ordinance. What was done? A, did you reach out? And B, what did they do? Because if law enforcement is not in the picture, we certainly, can start with the property manager or owner and give them that opportunity to mitigate the situation, especially if it's not a reoccurring issue. I want to know if they don't take care of that, and I find that to be high on my list of things that could cause enforcement action. As I'm going through short-term rental licenses for renewals, I have found, as was pointed out by a person who spoke, phone number wasn't any good. That was noted for the emergency contact. I called it, it went to voicemail. Voicemail was full, couldn't even leave a message. Unacceptable. I don't like that at all. And I don't think that piece is emphasized enough, is that, that person who's noted as an emergency contact, they're on call 24 hours a day, and they need to answer that phone, and they need to be able to mitigate the issue, and if they can, I need to know. I want to know either way, whether they did or didn't, but that's a very important aspect of it.
PT, would you, and I think one of the things you've recommended too is document when you have called, or if you have emailed, if you happen to have their email address, document that. Because when you get a message that says, well, this happened last week, and yes, I called, no date, no time, no context, that hinders PT being able to do anything effectively.
Yeah. Yep, and that was kind of my next point that I was going to lead into is when making a complaint to me, especially one that requires follow-up and you want it investigated, I'd kind of like to leave you with this example. A lot of people don't know this, but you can make a complaint against somebody's driving. You see me driving, you don't like the way I'm driving, you can contact the Sheriff's Department, you can file a complaint about my driving. And if someone were to file a complaint against you and your driving, what information would you expect them to have that would cause you to go to court and be held accountable for that potentially? Color of vehicle, who's behind the steering wheel, can you identify him? Date and time, location, direction of travel. All that information that helps build the complaint that then could eventually result in a citation. For me, date, time, location, was law enforcement called? Did you try and contact the property manager or property owner? What was the outcome of the law enforcement response? Do you have a complaint number? Do you have an officer's name? Just building that, giving me that picture, because I wasn't there, so that I can follow up and have that information to go further. I will never complain that you gave me too much information. And quite often, it's the opposite. And also, it doesn't help me if 2 weeks after the event occurs or 2 weeks after some issues have occurred, you call me or email me and say, hey, we got issues in the neighborhood, I've had noise complaints and over the past month, and I don't have specific date times. I don't know if law enforcement was called. I don't know if you called the property manager or owner. So it's important that if there is an issue that you feel needs to be brought to someone's attention, that it's done at that time and with as much detail as I can be given. I would also remind that enforcement of our ordinance, the short-term rental ordinance, or any of our ordinances really, does not equal a citation every time, that the interest of the township is mitigation, and enforcement is action taken to correct a violation or prevent future complaints at the property in question. Corrective action may lead to a citation or suspension or revocation of the short-term rental license, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go there. A quick example. I'm losing my train of thought here. I received a phone call today on a short-term rental. No, let me take that back, correct that. Timing-wise, this worked out very well. Leslie returned today, went through her emails, found an email that was sent to her, not through the complaint form. It was just, this neighbor's got a light that comes on when he has short-term renters there, and it shines in my house. Can you please do something about that? This was 3 weeks old. I reached out to the property owner. He said, I will mitigate this right away, and please let the individual know who called you, that I'll have someone there to take care of it right away. I didn't know it was an issue. Those are easy, doesn't require a tremendous amount of information, able to handle it. Law enforcement doesn't need to be involved. So we can do it that way, but anything of magnitude, especially if it's reoccurring, lots of good, solid information. Pictures are great as well. We received a parking complaint late 2022. Staff was able to go by that property in question within 50 minutes, I think it was, and there was no parking issue. It was gone. So a picture's worth 1,000 words. If a photograph had been taken, that may have been something that could have allowed us to further investigate that. Keep in mind, again, this is for those who are watching, if a photograph is part of the investigation that you want to use as supporting evidence, either an affidavit has to be signed that you took the photograph, or you would have to appear in court if it were to go to court. But pictures are very important, and they're huge. I think I know I spoke a lot on enforcement, but lots of information. Please utilize local law enforcement. We have 2 community police officers. I talk to them weekly, and even if law enforcement isn't called for the event, you can reach out to them during working hours, let them know this has been an issue, and then say, can you please make sure, Preston at East Bay Township knows as well, if they chose not to reach out to me. I want to circle back on calling your neighbor, or calling the individual who's noted as the property manager or the property owner. A lot of people do not feel comfortable turning in their neighbors, and I understand that. I dealt with that in law enforcement as well. You don't have to. It doesn't mean that just because you didn't reach out to the property owner that I'm not going to do anything. It's just another piece of the puzzle that helps me in my investigation. You can remain anonymous. I just need good facts. And so I get it that you don't want to rock the boat with your neighbors. You got to live next to them. I don't have to. And I've even heard some are in fear of retaliation. And I get that as well. So it's not mandatory, but it's just helpful if that attempt is made to mitigate with the property owner or property manager. In 2022, I'll go to 2023 real quick. I'm going to count today's light as one short-term rental complaint for the year. That's the only one we've received. Certainly, it's the off-season, and that's not surprising, but that complaint has been attached to the property and our BSNA system, and it's there permanently that we received a complaint about a light there and the action that is being proposed by the property owner. In 2022, our office received 15 complaints related to short-term rental issues. Now, I'm going to sidebar for a second. Young lady that spoke at the podium that said that there were drunken, disorderly people and parties and issues, I am not for 1 second implying that that's not happening. Not for 1 second. I am saying, though, I'm not receiving that information. In past meetings, people have spoke about raging parties, bands going all night long. Just as sure as there's not a hair in my head, I'm telling you, there hasn't been those calls received in my office. And I am the only one getting those calls. And again, as I said, the timing worked out well. There wasn't a ton of complaints sitting in Leslie's email. There was one on short-term rentals, and it was the light. So I'm not saying they're not going on, but they're not being reported. And it may be very well because they don't want to tell on their neighbor, or maybe there was confusion on how to make the complaint with the township.
All of the contact information too for you and for short-term rentals, that kind of list of where to call as well, that's available on our website too, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. I think I touched on it briefly earlier. There's basically 3 properties in the year of 2022 that were a source of complaint, 3. 2 of which were the bulk of that. Of those 15 complaints, or 14 actually, 90% of those were those 2 properties. I'm happy to report that one of those properties that has been mitigated, and it was a little bit of a lengthy process, but I got a call from the guy that was kind of the victim, if you will, to the short-term rental neighbor. And he said, hey, it's all been taken care of, no further issues. So that leaves one main property that we still, not yet this year, but have received multiple complaints on, with the bulk of those being noise-related. Both of those 2 main properties that I've noted of the 3 have installed noise monitoring devices to the exterior of the property that monitors the noise level. They can set the parameters, and then they, as the property manager or property owner, get notified when the noise exceeds that whatever parameter they set. That seems to have been pretty beneficial. As, again, the one gentleman said, we have had no further issues. Noises is by far the number 1 complaint. And I encourage our residents to contact law enforcement if we got a party going on. I will say this, though, is that an obscene noise level can be subjective, and just because it may disturb your peace, law enforcement may not see it that way. But it's still a record that law enforcement was called out there, and I can do some more due diligence on my end to see just exactly what the officer observed. Even though maybe notes weren't made in his CAD system in his car, or a report wasn't done, I can speak to that officer and get their feedback on what they observed. Regarding short-term rental issues as well, none were relayed to me by either of our 2 community police officers. So both of them know that, hey, if you get called to one of these homes that's a short-term rental, that information would most likely be relayed through dispatch or through the computer. I want to know about it. Please let me know. And again, we're in contact every week. And to this date, I've not been told of any short-term rental by law enforcement that was an issue from our community police officers. And again, just because, I mean, I have not received those complaints. Again, I'm not saying that anyone's being dishonest or they didn't happen. It's just they're not being reported. And I encourage strongly that if there are ragers going on, if there's bands playing, if there's noise levels that anybody would find unacceptable, please make that phone call so that we know about it and we can address it. If I don't know it's a problem, I can't address it. And then I wanted to, on the enforcement, I wanted to sum up that our office takes the regulation and potential enforcement of short-term rental ordinances seriously. Upon receiving a complaint with sufficient supporting material, our office will investigate each complaint received. In the year of 2022, if I received a complaint with sufficient supporting material, I investigated every one of those complaints. On some issues that I just wanted to share with you as you guys are taking on this huge task of trying to make a great product here with a new ordinance for short-term rentals. We want to share with you a couple issues. There have been some people, I noted several, I think it's about a half dozen, that, and this is just for your information as you're moving forward, they let their license expire. They were not aware of a pending moratorium. The moratorium went into effect, and they tried to renew. However, the system will not allow that attempted renewal because it'll be considered a new application. And like I said, there's roughly a half dozen of those, just for your information. And June 22nd, 2022 is when the moratorium went into effect. Hours, if not maybe a day or two before that went into effect, we had 2 applicants that applied for a short-term rental license. I could not approve the license at the time because of an item or two that was missing or that was not conforming to the ordinance. They paid, and I call it being in the queue. They're just sitting there, but I couldn't approve them at the time, and then the moratorium went into effect. So just, again, for your information.
Would the items that they had outstanding have been resolved? Do you know on those?
At this point, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then I got, again, I just talked about it earlier on lighting. This has actually come up 3 or 4 times. Again, for your consideration is that lighting, I get it, a short-term rental host wants it to be an inviting atmosphere. Oftentimes that's associated with some exterior lighting. Sometimes it's the little colored lamps that are on a string. You see them in a campground often. Sometimes it's some pretty substantial exterior lighting by the porch area or by where maybe a bonfire area would be. And like the individual who made a complaint today, they don't have an issue with that. It's when they go in for the night, but they leave the light on all night. And then all I can think of is the Seinfeld episode where Kramer was right next to that new chicken place and the blazing red sign light was coming through his window all night and he couldn't sleep. And so, again, something for you to think about. And then the transferring of licenses, almost daily this comes up. And really since June 22nd of last year, It is no exaggeration that I've received hundreds of inquiries on short-term rental licenses. Where are we at? When's the moratorium going to lift? And oftentimes, part of that conversation is the transferring of the licenses. All right, I rambled on. What questions do you have for me?
Maybe more of a statement, and we've touched on it, but wholly, the intent from day one was not that these licenses were transferable. The intent was, before we had an ordinance, they weren't allowed. They did them, but there was no mechanism for them to have a short-term rental. The appeal that many of us listened to was that these were long-term family homes that they wanted to keep in their families. They weren't looking at it as a business. It was not something that was transferable. That was never brought into the license. It was a mechanism for them to keep their family cottages or their homes. So I'm having a hard time understanding where the misunderstanding has grown so big, where all of these individuals, LLCs, businesses are buying up all of these properties with the intent that they're going to resell them with a short-term rental license on it, and they're losing value because the township is all of a sudden not allowing that. We've never allowed it. It's never been a condition. I guess it's more of a statement than a question or whatever, but I just, I guess maybe we need to do better with that part of it, too. It's never been a condition. It's never been part of the ordinance that they could sell it and have that license.
And we haven't allowed any transfers of licenses.
That we know of. But with LLCs, maybe the name stayed the same, so we don't know.
Well,
Can I just say something on that?
sure.
The only difference is, under the old ordinance, we didn't allow it to be transferred, but the person buying it could come back in and apply for another one right away.
Right.
So with it being already there, it was a pretty easy.
It was a much lower bar.
Because we didn't have a cap.
Well, thank you, Preston.
Of all the enforcement you've talked about, you mentioned the lighting issue being one of the more recent ones. Is lighting a complaint last year at all?
Yep, I received a couple last year. Yep. And they were mitigated, but they were an issue, yep.
Good. Thank you.
Appreciate all your work.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
As well, I want to mention the community police officer's number is as well on our website. And when you call the CPO number or when you email them, that populates right on their laptop. And if they are on duty, which they work 10s, it will populate and they will see that they monitor it through the day, so.
So if they didn't call those numbers, should they be calling the non-emergent?
There is also the non-emergent, you don't have to call 911, there's a non-emergent emergency number as well on there. And you can, when you call that, wait to speak to a dispatcher and just let them know, it's not a critical emergency, but you're having this issue and you would want an officer sent out. Yeah. Okay, with that, Claire, do you want to pop up here for a second? I can't hardly see you behind the podium there. Yeah, that sounds good. So we've heard the overview, we've heard the new policy, we've heard public comment. We've received some public comment in our packet and on our desk. We've heard from the zoning administrator with respect to enforcement. Claire, how would you like to proceed? Or did you have a specific way you were thinking of walking us through this agenda item?
Jake went through the edits that he put together based on your conversation in November. And so I would recommend kind of going through the proposed edits that his firm put together based on your last discussion. and kind of, discussing amongst yourselves kind of how you want to proceed with accepting these proposed edits or making some changes. And Jake is here to answer any questions about those, I think, 12 proposed additional edits, as well as the draft policy that he put before you. I don't have anything additional beyond.
Okay.
beyond that.
Claire, could we kind of maybe lean on this memo from you and Jacob? Because it kind of succinctly puts it rather than the lengthy ordinance. We can always refer to the specific ordinance as we need to, but maybe we go through the summary of changes.
Yep, yeah, I would recommend just going through those 12 proposed changes.
All right, so on the first one, you talk, this speaks to section 5F4. First of all, before we go through any specifics, let me ask, does any board member have anything else specifically they want to say? I mean, Sue mentioned kind of the comment about the transfer of license and how she felt that the original intent of the ordinance was intended. Does any other board member, have any other comments or questions that are very general in nature like that, that we wouldn't get to going through these specifics? Sure, go ahead, Mindy.
So when Mark was up, he was talking about the septic systems and failures and how a renewal couldn't happen if you didn't meet the standard, that kind of thing. So my question was more for Preston and how the process would work if a person has a license, is trying to renew, has a failure of a septic system that they fully intend to rectify. How would our system work right now with regards to a failed system at a renewal time and that kind of thing?
So I thankfully haven't had to deal with that yet, but to the best of our office's ability, we assess the urgency of the matter. And I guess my suggestion would be that there was no further rental activity until that was mitigated, and then our office was provided with proof of that.
One thing I want to underscore with that question is when Preston talked about enforcement is not always a citation. It's not always a revocation of a license. As a matter of fact, that's probably the last thing. And I know I was speaking to an attorney, not on short-term rentals, but just in general with ordinances, and we were talking about that very same issue, and they said, actually, when you get to that point, it's a loss on all sides. I mean, that's not where you want to be. We try very hard. Preston does an excellent job. You want to bring people into compliance. You want to mitigate the issue, bring them into compliance. So I have a hard time believing that someone would contact us or through the renewal process, we would find that they had an issue and they were actively seeking to address it with conversations with Faith, Sousa, and the health department, and getting, prices on what they'd have to do to rectify it, and that we would do anything other than help support and guide through that process. Would you agree with that, Claire?
So they would be given a time frame, probably, I would assume.
I only bring it up because that's what I thought would happen, but the only thing that catches me, right, in his comment is that if you're up for renewal and you don't pass and there's a cap on it, are you going to lose your one spot? That is the concern that I think that they have.
Yeah.
And I think that is not something that's insurmountable, but I don't know how we would work it with the way this ordinance is written. That is my thought, is that if they're at that renewal period and they've got to submit everything and there's a failure of whatever, that, yes, we don't want to run it in this time period because there's an issue, but do they lose their rent, their short-term rent?
How long is their space?
Hold your other questions, and let's get to that question with Jacob. Jacob, You heard what Preston and I just mentioned to Mindy.
Yes.
I'm assuming that that is a valid way to proceed on our department and township's behalf? That we
Oh,
would,
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the ordinance sets forth like a process for handling failures to adhere to the township's short-term rental ordinance. And that is, there's a notice of violation, which may result in a hearing on that violation, a request to be heard. And I mean, I think it's, the discretionary language used in that section, to me, I think that says that at any point in time in this process, if the violation is remedied, there's obviously no reason to go through a hearing on the violation and have the township board make a determination as to whether or not such a violation occurred. And talking about, is a license going to be revoked due to a one-time failure to remedy a wastewater issue?
It's not the revoking of a license, it's at that time of renewal, because they can't meet the criteria of the licensing that I see as it could be a potential problem. Say right now during the moratorium, right? They went and they're doing all their paperwork for the renewal within the time that they're given, and then they find that there is an issue, and right now, the ground's frozen, they can't get things in, it can't be done till April, that's what I'm thinking of, because if we cap it, then they don't have the ability to come back at another time and get that. And how can we work within the guidance of the ordinance to get that?
I do think that Section 7 is a little ambiguous as to how that would be handled. If the board is so inclined, we could amend it to basically, clarify that if at the time of renewal, I mean, I guess the one thing we have is so the default application procedures provide, like, I think just a 14-day to correct an incomplete application. If an application, says, hey, we don't have a functioning sewer system, that's an incomplete application. And so under the ordinance as written, I think there's basically a 2-week period to remedy that. I guess outside of that, we could explore some kind of additional language that would.
Jacob, could there be a conditional granting based upon so for example, in Mindy's example, you go to do a septic system now in the middle of winter, right? Might have an issue, might take 6 weeks. Would there be a way to grant conditional continuation or an ability to wait that time without putting that license up?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, as long as there's also something in the ordinance that reflects that no rental activity is going to occur unless and until the property is brought into full compliance, I think, granting an extension on the reapplication period under those circumstances would be reasonable.
I don't know if that's the thought of the board, but I think that makes sense, because we want people to get the inspections done. We really want, what's going into the lakes to be as healthy as possible, and stuff breaks, right?
We don't want them to avoid doing it or to hide doing it. We would want them to correct it. And I would think most people would want to as well who own it, because that is the quality of the lake is.
What brings people to their.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I just wanted to bring that up, because I can see where Mark was coming from on that, because, right now, I don't think there is a mechanism to do that in here. It's too cut and dry that you would be denied, and then there isn't a short-term rental license to get for that same.
Did you have any other specific kind of general observations or
No other general
questions?
questions.
Okay. Tracy? Matt?
Good.
Okay, Matt?
Just general comments. I know we discussed it in the past, many discussions that we've had on this topic, but I guess one of the issues that was brought up by some of the STR owners was the turnover days. And I guess me personally, of all the opinions that I have on the STR issue, that's not one that, I don't know, I don't have a real strong opinion on.
Okay. Anything else, Sue, you mentioned earlier? Okay. Well, one thing, this is a very divisive issue, and I think what we're trying to seek to do is, if you have an STR owner who is an ardent, they want to have everything, in the ordinance skewed towards that, they may not be happy with the outcome. If you have a homeowner who does not like short-term rentals and just wants us to get rid of them and not have any at all, they may be disappointed with the outcome. What we're seeking to do is balance the interests on behalf of the community. And that's not always an easy thing to do, but that's kind of what we're trying to get to with this ordinance. So that's kind of my general comment. Okay, with that, I guess we will go through the specifics here, Claire.
Can I just make one more comment?
Yeah.
Now that I thought, I just saw the, under, whatever, that's a section E, what one is, it's the length and timing of suspension, so it's section 12E. We've got a 1, 2, 3 process for suspensions and revocations. Is there anything that would escalate it to an immediate cease? We don't have anything built there. I'm not sure what it would be. It's on page 147. It's where we've created the first suspension, which is 3 months, second suspension, 6 months, third is revoking permanent. Is there a mechanism if it is something so, that we can take number 3 and bring it right to 1? I mean, we're talking about.
Well, I think these relate to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob and Claire and PT, these relate to continual issues with the short-term rental, as far as the noise, say a lighting issue that is, I don't know how that lighting issue would fall under here. I think it's great that everyone's working together on that one, but noise in particular, or maybe egregious parking, right? That's really the first suspension, second suspension, revocation. Not meeting the safety and health requirements in the ordinance,
Right.
which comes with.
What I'm looking at is, and I don't know, but if there's someone that's being threatened because they're trying to report an issue, trying to go through those lines, one bad apple's given everybody a bad name. So is there a way that that mechanism can be escalated? So if a homeowner is calling the short-term rental manager or whatever, and then they're being retaliated or threatened against, and it can be documented, is that something that could escalate revoking their license? Is that, I guess, right now I don't see anything in place that way. Do you understand where I'm coming
I think
from?
I do. I would imagine Jacob would, and I'm just guessing here, tie the kind of what we see in E back to kind of a due process. I mean, you have to give somebody who's being alleged something the opportunity for Preston to.
I mean, yeah, well, that's why it's like, no, I mean, it's escalated already to that point where it's been documented. There is an incident, there is a complaint, there is a concern for safety. So it's there. I don't know. I don't know if it's an
Yeah.
issue, but I don't know that we've ever really discussed it before.
I don't think we've ever really had to do it. And of course, this doesn't negate safety, like
Sure.
personal safety. Go ahead, Jacob.
Does it make sense what
Sorry.
you're saying, Jacob?
No, it does make sense. And I guess one thing that I would draw your attention to is if we're talking about, I guess, kind of really egregious conduct, first off, if someone is threatening someone, there's independent mechanisms to address that conduct outside of the short-term rental license. And then if there's also really egregious behavior, I'll turn your attention to Section 10. The township can also file municipal civil infraction citations and direct someone to appear in district court. And there is also, if you look at 10D, you can go to circuit court and initiate abatement proceedings there to address violations as a nuisance per se. So the revocation of the short-term rental license is just kind of one tool in the township's toolbox and how they deal with these kind of things. I guess for me, if the conduct is like not criminal, it's not, and I assume, I mean, we also talked about the noise ordinance earlier. If that's something where law enforcement personnel is showing up and issuing citations, that's a pretty strong detractor. I mean, I think the process set forth here, I mean, there's kind of enough of a variety of remedies that I don't know that we would necessarily need the ability to summarily suspend a license, without some kind of proceeding. I just don't see, I guess, what harm would there be that couldn't be addressed through the township's noise ordinance, through a civil infraction citation. And we, I think it looks like, is it 21 days from the time a written notice of violation is processed to when there's a public hearing? And I don't know. I mean, that's 21 days followed by another 21 days. That's, 6 weeks, and that's all it will take to impose a 6-month suspension. So it's, I guess if there's concerns, and maybe it would be helpful to kind of walk through some hypotheticals as to, what scenario is being contemplated here that wouldn't fall under another ordinance, or under criminal behavior, and the remedies in the ordinance seem insufficient for that kind of scenario. Because I do think the risk there is, without some kind of opportunity to be heard and for everyone's side to be told, that might open up that process a little bit to abuse if someone is very annoyed and wanting to expedite the complaint process.
I get that, and I also know that there's emotions on both sides, and so there should be maybe even another side to it. The false claim needs to have some type of a.
Yeah, it's on here. False claims are.
Okay.
Yep. I do think, Sue, if something was that egregious, I agree with Jacob. I think there's another law that's probably going to intercede. And we do have, like, he went through the different remedies that are available to us through this ordinance.
Just wanted to make sure that when I saw that again, that I made the comment.
And I will say, there's not really like a one size fits all for, okay, how do we arrange the penalties with how many violations you have? I've worked on ordinances where, if as long as basically there's some due process in a public hearing, I've worked with ordinances that say, one violation, you go before the township board, it's ascertained that you violate the ordinance, your license is revoked, and you can apply for a new one in a year. So if you think like the 3 and 6 month suspension and then the permanent revocation, if that's like too lenient, that's something that can be revisited. I mean, as long as we kind of have this same structure, like Beth was saying, you know, we still have this due process that gives people a chance to be heard. That's something that could be modified, but I think without having that hearing, you know, we probably don't want to interfere with the issued license.
Okay, with that, I think we'll go back to this memo, and it's on page 134, that 1 through 12 are what's been added in. After that is what we've seen prior to this. So if you have an issue with 1 through 17, I'm hopeful that you would have voiced that to this point already. And you still can do so, clearly. But let's go ahead and use our time for items 1 through 12. And I'll probably have you walk us through some of this, Claire, but I'll start us off with item 1, which talks about how we will notice available licenses, and it refers to that policy that Jacob created. I'm just looking to see what the board's feedback on that terminology is, and some initial feedback on that policy.
I looked it over. I think it's well-crafted, well thought out. You know, I guess I had in my mind that there would be a big celebration and a raffle, you know, lottery for who gets the first one, but that's impractical to manage. And, you know, just kind of thinking this through theoretically, years down the road, once some of these existing licenses fall out through attrition or other means, and there's one that comes available, someone that wanted to apply would have to be in a position to own, you know, a property that would meet that criteria at that time to support that. So it's probably a fairly limited amount of people, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, I think you're going to find when we get to that point, it's the big companies that are prepared and looking that will find it, not just Joe Blow that's thinking about doing it. Because
That's true.
I was kind of interested in the first come, first serve versus the lottery. I know the lottery was a big thing that a lot of municipalities were talking about when they first started looking at short-term rentals. Any reason, Jacob, of the choice between one or the other?
I think, and this decision might have been made a little bit ago, so forgive me if my recollection is a little foggy. I thought it was just because that this approach would be easier with the host compliance software.
Okay.
I don't know that there's really a huge, I mean, it's not merit-based. So this way there's a little bit less randomization and a little more, I guess, a reward for being diligent and kind of Johnny on the spot with submitting the application. But I don't know, I mean, between those two selection processes, it's really, I don't have an issue recommending one over the other.
Okay, thank you.
So long as the Office of Planning and Zoning can, you know, accommodate some kind of fair way to do a lottery.
The one thing that I was thinking with the lottery is that, you know, we'd have to charge people the full fee for each application that was processed. So if it's a lottery, then we'd have to process every single one of those applications. So then, say you have, you know, 20 people that submit an application, then all 20 of those people would pay the full application price, only one
And
of them
there's
would get it.
19 refunds.
So this way, we would only process the applications in order, and so then only.
Yeah. That
You know,
makes sense.
One other thing, I don't know how difficult it would be to manage, but you could have some type of rolling first come, first served list that somebody could actually sign up on the list today and it could wait, 4 years, and at that point, you could contact them. I mean, I don't know what that list would look like in 3 or 4 years. You contact them, you reach out, see if they still want to apply, scratch them off the list, and keep moving down until you find the next person available.
True, except I'm afraid we'll find what we found with lateral fees. And the list, it gets so old and long that then you just can't track the people, like you mentioned. Yeah.
One thing we could do is do something to that effect on an annual basis, because the one thing that I was wondering about is if we say we get to the point where we have the exact number of licenses that our cap is, and through, somebody not renewing, maybe we have 3, 4, 5 times a year that a license becomes available, that would be a lot of staff time to process that, noticing in the paper the 90 days, so that could be one option where maybe once a year it becomes available, people sign up, and then they're in the queue for that year.
Just want to make sure we're not like creating a Taylor Swift ticket issue, it's-
Same.
And then they'd have to pay the license fee too, because you're doing the work to process it, right? So if you say, okay, we're going to take 5 licenses or 5 applications, we think we're going to have 1 or 2 licenses, those 5 you get, they're all paying the license fee.
Just as we process them, so they can be in the queue and.
Just talking about creating a notification list.
Yeah.
The only other question I have on here is the 145, and we say that's kind of based on the 2.5%. We're a growing township. So to get from, the 170 to 145 takes 5 years. But 2.5 at that time might be 165. Does that number rotate? I mean, are we,
And Jake might speak to this, but the way the ordinance is drafted right now is the board will revisit that cap. And so it's the cap is 145, it won't change unless the board revisits it. It's based on the 2.5% of total housing stock, but that's a board policy decision, and so as you revisit it, you can revisit that.
I would think we'd set it like annually, because we can, when they get put on the assessment roll, then they're an occupancy and.
But what qualifies as the housing stock?
Well, those that we just approved tonight would be added when they're built out.
Well, but then there's deed restricted properties that wouldn't allow them anyway, so does that get factored into it or not?
Good question.
Those are factored into the housing stock right now, but it took us some time working with the assessor to figure out, because we were looking for the total occupied units that were, had a PRE. So,
So you're saying you did take into consideration those subdivisions that have a deed restriction on it?
we did not with this total housing stock.
Okay. I think that's what Matt was getting to.
Right, so we did not take that.
Okay.
I mean, you can do it less frequently with the census, which gives you households.
The census was not accurate.
Oh, okay.
On that note that Matt brought up, we went over that, and the updated draft language does call it out as 145, which is approximately 2.5%. Is there a need to have that 2.5% in there, in the ordinance? I mean, it's informational, but
I don't think it should be.
I don't either.
I think somebody's gonna.
'Cause then it
come
gets
up on us
ambiguous,
and-
yeah.
Especially since we have 800 how do I say this? 800 units with land use permits and 500 with approved site plans.
the only thing I'd say is that if you don't have something to base your number on, it's just an arbitrary number.
Yeah, then it's just.
Yeah, I
So if you don't
agree.
spell it out, we could come back here next year and have a meeting and say, hey, 145, we don't like 145, let's make it 100. 'cause-
We can have it on the website.
I saw I think, I'm trying to remember if I was looking at, I think it was Elmwood Township. They had like an asterisk at the bottom of their ordinance stating that number was a certain percentage of the total housing stock, so.
At the time of the ordinance or something.
At the time of.
I mean, I think it's fine putting it in there the way that it is. It's not saying that you're going to, it doesn't tie you to recalculating it on any certain interval or to any number. I mean, it gives the 145 and the rationale for how you got there so that future boards can take a look at that and go,
They
okay,
did it by this.
Right.
Well, we want to do it by.
might be now might be the time that the number of households have changed quite a bit.
Does that language then, if we move forward with that, need to be amended to say of the total housing units within the township, not including deed-restricted properties?
But it does include, it does include.
Well, I think we get the number from planning and zoning, and they have a mechanism by which they get that number, and it doesn't include the deed restricted, because it's,
Well, no, it does.
oh, it does include the deed restricted, okay.
Yeah,
I was
they
gonna,
haven't-
when you said it, I thought I heard you say it didn't, and I was like, wow, you guys went through and did all of those?
We took out the non-PRE homes. So it's the
It's the permanent residence homes is what.
So you just have to have the number of PREs in the township.
So
Got
if
it.
they're long-term rentals,
Okay.
they're not included in this housing stock.
Or if it's fractional.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact methodology that I worked with the assessor to figure out the occupied long-term housing units was
Would
the
be,
goal, and so.
yeah.
But there needs to be some language that kind of defines, kind of wraps that up as to what it actually is, because right now it says something different,
Or doesn't go that deep.
or not included at all.
Or if it's going to be a true percentage, I like the fact that after, that it would come back to the board annually to adjust that number, potentially.
I think we could just define total housing units in the definition for this ordinance.
Yeah, that's fine, as long as there's some clarity around what that actually means.
Right, right. And you could,
I think that there was some nuance to figuring out the total housing units, because there's a lot of different ways to count housing units. We had to take out the timeshares that were along US 31 in the regional business district, so it took quite a bit of, reviewing the assessing records to get the most accurate. So I wouldn't want, the definition is going to have quite a bit of nuance to it.
I think that, go ahead.
I would also note that it says approximately. So there is some softness to the language there. And I guess maybe it's important to not get too drawn out into the weeds. There's a lot of variables, and we're still kind of, we're picking 2.5% as this is the appropriate cap. There needs to be a reasonable and good fit between the regulations we're imposing and the problems we're addressing. But it doesn't have to be a absolutely perfect scientific fit. I think the intent of this language is to explain the rationale and link, to why there's a cap to the total number of housing units.
So you don't think we need to put all the nuances that we did to.
I think that might be overkill. I think and really the important thing is that information is contained in the record of these proceedings that surround the adoption of the ordinance, because that's available as an expression of the township board's intent. This is what the township looked into and examined when making this determination. But all of that rationale, there's certainly some rationale at the beginning, but there's also, Claire shared these rental data indicators that are in the record before the township. Some of the finer justifications for why and how we're regulating short-term rentals in the way we are, I don't think it necessarily needs to be explicitly spelled out in excruciating detail in the ordinance. So long as there's enough there to, establish this is the intent and the objective of the ordinance, and this is how we're accomplishing this, the exact way we're getting to it. I don't think it needs to be necessarily explained as an exact science in the ordinance itself.
Okay. Let's go down to item 3 as, oh, Mindy, go ahead.
With regards to this policy, I would suggest that after 14, in submission of application, 14 days and 90 days, we use calendar days in there. And then one other thing, I'm gonna jump on you for a second because I have to depart. I would also request that we add the definition of the address point of the property.
Okay.
Sorry, the definition of what?
The address point of the property.
Oh, sure.
Great, thank you, Mindy. Appreciate it. Item 3 of the changes brought to us have to do with 1,000 feet from that address point. I did have a question too as to where we call the address point. I didn't know if that was like the front door or what, but, so that's a good suggestion. How are board members feeling about the 1,000 feet and it being from a specific point?
Well, I want the specific point in there, and it's established for all pieces of property. It's established at the road of where your address is. So if you're in a subdivision, it's not a whole lot different if it's at, you know, this point in the road as opposed to the lot. But when you're out in the rural area, it can make a tremendous amount of difference, you know.
So are you saying your understanding the address point would be where the driveway intersects with the road?
Not necessarily. The address point is established by, what's the department?
Yeah, so
GIS.
that's what we used is because to administer it in planning and zoning, the parcel boundary was an easy way to, go with that 1,000-foot buffer. And so, but then to Matt's point, there's also a point that's on top of the house structure so that we can tell where the house is, where the garage is. They put the address on top of the dwelling unit. And so that's what we used, and PT was able to successfully do that with.
So if you define it, it could just relate to the address point as defined by equalization, Grand Traverse County equalization. Yeah. Okay. Does that work for? Okay. For, that's the proportions, right? Where it's a different amount for every room that's on page 142 and 143. I'm completely indifferent to that, and doing the math, it's very little difference one way or the other from what we currently have. But what's the pleasure of the board with that?
You're on item 4?
Yes.
In the list of 12?
Yes. On page 134.
So not on the summary, but on the amendments to the draft ordinance.
I will note for number 4, the new formula actually allows more renters per home for the larger homes than what we currently allow. So, right now.
Which is probably more a function of me not being good with numbers.
Well, no, the crossing, point where it crosses is the 4 bedrooms. So anything less than 4 bedrooms, this allows less than, and over 4 bedrooms, it allows slightly more. But we're talking one that had, at the greatest amount, lower than 4 bedrooms was the 1 bedroom, obviously. They could have 6 right now, and now they could only have 4. On the largest, like a 6-bedroom, they could have 18. They were allowed 16. I mean, it's relatively small numbers. I personally don't know if it's really worth it. I mean, I think just 2 a bedroom and 4 on top.
Yeah, I think, to me, this level of detail just really doesn't provide any value to anybody. I don't think. I mean, it should be something very straightforward based on a bedroom count or some other mechanism, but for someone, from an enforcement standpoint, let's be honest, like, so you're gonna go out there and start, somebody gonna be going out and counting bedrooms and
Right.
who's staying here, who's just a visitor.
Well, I think the potential renter is going to say, oh my gosh, they've got 3 sets of bunk beds in that room, and we're looking at adults. That's just not the right fix for us. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think you're probably right, but again, how in the world would this be enforced?
And the marginal difference. And we've never had, I don't recall a complaint one way or the other. I don't recall a short-term rental saying you're not allowing enough, nor do I recall someone saying, well, we may have had a comment in
had some.
general saying they're packing a house.
Yeah.
But it's
Got a
usually.
bachelorette party.
Right.
There's 20 girls there and.
But it's more egregious than, what we have now would handle that.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, something a little more, have a one-liner, knock it out.
I mean, I think the biggest concern is just the septic system, so for the smaller homes, for additional people is quite a bit more than what the septic system would be rated for if it was, a one-bedroom or two-bedroom. And if if it's continuous, then they're, that would be equivalent to someone that was a permanent resident there.
And if it's municipal sewer, septic tank or holding tank or cistern tank or whatever, it's going to dictate that too.
I think this gives enforcement a way to go in and have some structure. Okay, how many of you are staying here, or how many were staying here? And this gives them numbers to go by that, if it's a bigger home, then.
But we did have those numbers before. We had 2 per bedroom plus 4.
And then the last draft we reviewed, we
Right.
had scaled it back to just 2 per bedroom as a.
Yeah, and that just is very tight to me.
I don't think, for me personally, that didn't make sense because so
No.
many have a transitional rec room where they put some bunk beds.
Well, and yeah, I would agree. So, either way.
But again, from an enforcement standpoint, if you're trying to, we're trying to craft some ordinance language around limiting the amount of people that are, say, using a one-bedroom cottage, what's to prevent them from doing that? The bachelorette party, one person's going to put the credit card into the
Right.
Airbnb and go show up with everybody else.
Well, their management company should be filtering that out,
Yeah.
for one. And then if someone calls, then Preston has, or the police officer has, a mechanism to say, no, there's too many bodies here. It doesn't, there's only one bedroom, so you can have 6 people here. The rest of you need to leave at whatever time it is the visitors have to leave.
11.
Because you're now a visitor or a guest, whichever way we're
Yeah.
using.
Is anyone wholly tied to this stratification with rooms, or are you fine with what we currently have?
It really doesn't matter to me either way, but something needs to be in there because really it's more information for the person that actually owns the rental.
Right.
To know what they can do. Yes, but enforcement's going to be tough no matter what you do. You're exactly right.
I would say, it's just my recommendation, keep it simple,
Agreed.
which is what we currently have.
How do you feel, Claire?
We can do that.
Or should we say ask Preston?
Preston, did you have any preference?
Sit down with Claire.
Want to use that one?
As I'm sitting here listening to that,
You can sit right here if you want.
couple things that came to mind is, I know that we're limiting the amount of people that stay there because of the impact, right? The intensity of that use. But also I want the language to be specific enough that people aren't putting people in closets with bunk beds, that there's a safety aspect to it as well, that the bedroom that they're in should generally be a conforming bedroom of some kind. So I guess I would want that language to support that as well.
Isn't that in what they have to turn in for to get a license? They have to specify what's a bedroom, and it has to have whatever is
to be
conforming, a window and a closet.
It does, yep, yep.
John, has this been an issue?
No,
He needs to come up to Mike, if you're going to ask him.
so this hasn't really become an issue with us. I think the 2+4 has worked. I can't talk to management companies. I can talk about myself as an individual owner, and I manage my own places, and for a couple of other individual owners. We strictly monitor how many people are in our homes. Strictly. If you had a house, a 6-bedroom house, and 20 people showed up, they wouldn't be staying in my house. I promise you that.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that. I understand that, John.
So.
Thank you.
So, you mentioned stick with the old rule or stick with the proposed new rule? So.
Yeah.
I would stick with the old.
It's simple.
I like it.
Okay, let's go with that. We'll go down to number 5, which is the septic system addition, the sentence where shall be fully functional and meet the minimum requirements by Grand Traverse County Health Department. Thoughts on that?
Well, that sounds simple, too, because it ties it to what does...
Somebody else.
Yeah.
And they are the ones who oversee that.
Right.
Until, and if possibly, if anything ever is done on a township level, I'm not saying it will be, or I'm not saying it won't be, but that's the authority, that's who has the expertise and authority right now. Okay. Move on to 6. This is the transfer, not allowing the transfer except for family. I do have a comment on this. It says a spouse, a child, a grandchild, parent, or grandparent. It doesn't mention sibling. Jacob, is there a reason it doesn't mention sibling?
I think because that was a statutory definition, but there are other statutory definitions, and I mean, beyond that, it really is whatever the township wants to include
Okay.
to be reflective of its intent.
I wouldn't have a problem with having.
Sibling would make sense to include, so we can include sibling.
Are you guys fine with that?
Yeah.
I think we were tying it to whatever assessing uses for the transfer rule, and sibling is in that, I think, anyway.
That might have just been an oversight on my behalf, so that's a good catch, thank you.
Okay, the next one is, let me go back to that one. Is the township board, and I realize we don't have everyone today, and we probably will not vote specifically on this today, but, because I would like the full board to be here for that. Are we keeping the non-transferability other than family members, sorry?
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. 7 is the restriction that it has to be to an individual, not to an LLC. Thoughts on that?
That I have a problem, or I could have a problem with. Like, I have long-term rentals, and I have them in an LLC. But we're saying, sorry, I don't know where it's at. We're saying that one member of that LLC has to be the contact person? Is that what we're saying?
No, they
Or-
have to be the license holder and owner here, correct, Jacob?
Yeah, and the intent behind that was to prevent an LLC from being transferred as a way of transferring a license.
Right.
Because I think the concern was that that sort of end around would allow LLCs to freely transfer their licenses when the property is sold, whereas
Right.
family-held short-term rentals could not really be transferred in that manner.
So this does not really affect, and I thought that was a very interesting point by Mark about the LLC and the limited liability. But the way number 7, the way I'm looking at, though this, this is in quotes, so this is the verbiage. This doesn't stop them from having an LLC own the short-term rental, correct? But the license has to be in an individual from the corporate representative stating that the short-term license will be held by that individual. And then it doesn't allow the license to transfer. So this doesn't really tie the hands of protecting their limited liability, correct?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. It's not going to impose any kind of greater liability on them. It's just also not going to give them additional flexibility that they would not be able to enjoy as an individual license holder.
Okay. Thoughts on that? Would leave it that way? Okay. Tracy?
I'm just trying to think, so that doesn't stop that LLC from having multiple short-term rentals, though.
No, but each one has to have an individual attached to it.
Right.
So then that way, here's what happens. You talk to someone who has an LLC and you say, you can't transfer the license. They're like, okay, yes, I can. They can, because what they do is they don't sell the house. They sell the LLC
Right.
that holds the house.
This may be a bad analogy, but I look at it as a car. You own the car, you have a license to drive the car. You sell the car, you can't transfer your license to that car.
Right.
So that's kind of, maybe it's a terrible analogy, but that's the way I'm kind of looking at it.
Okay.
But it should not affect give them greater liability. They still can have the LLC own it.
Right. No, I get that. I was just more concerned about the other way.
And it's no different than what we have right now. Someone has to sign off on.
Right, but they do it on behalf of the LLC,
Okay.
not on behalf of them. I mean,
The permit's still held by the LLC.
Yeah.
Okay.
not by an individual.
They're just the contact.
Okay.
Okay, if we go down to 8, an affidavit signed by the owner of the proposed short-term rental granting authority to the applicant. Oh, so this is tied with number 8 or 7, correct? Okay, we go down to all motor vehicles, campers, trailers associated, whether owned or operated by the owner, local agent, shall be solely parked on the short-term rental premises, not parked along any public or private roadway. The question I do have with that, and it might lead to another term there, is parked on the short-term rental premise could be filling the entire yard. When they go through the application process on the site plan, they have to identify the parking areas, correct? And it can't be the grassy areas, if I remember. It has to be like parking pads or designated parking. So I guess with that one, I would just want to make sure that our verbiage is clearly reflecting that tie to what they have to apply, what they have to include with their site plan. Does that make sense, Jacob?
Yeah, that does make sense. I don't really have any issue with including that. Claire, I feel like we might have discussed this issue when we were putting these amendments together. Is there any reason to recall as to why that would have been flagged as an issue, or is that?
Yeah, I think the concern was part of the way that we manage the impact of some of the short rentals is managing the parking. So if they're bringing more cars than what can accommodate in their parking area, then they're having additional impact on
Right.
adjacent parcels. We had some concerns because anyone can park on a public road, but then we can add a provision in our ordinance to say that if you have a short-term rental, then your renters cannot be on the public road as a way of minimizing the impact to adjacent properties.
So this brings up another question for me. So if someone renting a short-term rental has a camper and they want to bring that camper and have somebody stay in that, what in our ordinance addresses that?
You cannot use that as a dwelling unit, the camper.
Okay,
Or houseboats or,
right, I remember that now.
Yeah.
Okay. Just because I did that once, so.
I don't think you're the only one.
I know, but
Not
I mean,
East Bay
but we did
Township.
ask.
But you are the only elected official who's admitting it here at
Right.
this meeting.
Well, you
but
know,
no.
it wasn't here and
Just kidding.
It was in the UP and we asked and they said yes, and so we did.
And it goes in the UP.
Yeah.
You know, that things just go there, right? Everything goes there. All right, we have, and then down to 11, really, which is visitor and guest, and the consistency with that. Any issues there? And last is the consistency between the 14 calendar days rather than the business days, which I think is helpful because we do 10 and
Yeah.
we do 10 and a half days versus 5 8 hours, so.
Right, so it would be easier if it were calendar days.
and then you don't have to worry, okay, so are we supposed to include Sundays? Or are we not supposed to include, like when we're doing FOIAs?
Yeah.
Well, I think we're somewhere. Right, Claire?
Yeah. But each time we review this is positive momentum forward. We will need to make sure that we're, just keep our eye on the moratorium is extended through June 22nd. So we'll want to back that up 2 months just to make sure that if we don't have a final adopted ordinance, if we're not anticipating having a final adopted ordinance by that date, we'll want to take a look at a slight amendment of extension more.
Sounds like it might be pushing it if we don't vote to move it to a hearing in March.
No, May.
Well, no, I'm saying if we don't, we want to make sure we have enough time because we'll have to have an extended moratorium, at least by May,
Yeah,
to move it further out.
because we'll need May for the introduction of the ordinance, and we would need June, because June 22nd is after our meeting. Although, is it 30 days? No, it's upon publication, so we're fine.
This one is upon publication, I
So,
believe.
but if we don't pass it in June,
If we're expecting to pass it, but then don't,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
we might want to.
Do boards ever do that?
It may want to be something that we look at.
Yeah, well, let's see, let's bring this back next month with the revised language and see how close we're getting. I do want to ask the board, and, you know, I feel like a little bit of a disadvantage without Mindy and Glenn here without a full board, but some of the situations that PT mentioned that planning and zoning is experiencing, you know, if you have any specific guidance, we work through them the best that we can with the ordinances in place, and that's the short-term rental ordinances that exist now, plus the moratoriums.
Can I just, under
Oh,
section 15, it does state that the ordinance shall become effective the day following its publication, so not 30 days.
So,
Are you referring to the people who have
yes,
applications?
about the half dozen who, again, like Matt talked about, there was always this relatively easy bar. As long as you could check these things off the list, you were granted a license. And I'll be real honest, I think when planning and zoning and myself, we were going into this moratorium, I don't know why. I mean, I guess I anticipated the board setting the number of licenses above what we had, not significantly, but I did not foresee coming down the pike, just like boards we said could surprise you, I didn't see coming down the pike a lower number than what we currently had. And so we really didn't flesh that out a lot and like, okay, what's going to happen here? And, obviously that did catch some people who weren't paying close attention to the news and to their email because they are notified through host compliance when their date is coming up, I think 30 days before. So it is their responsibility. I do understand that. But I also understand the situation we had before. It was like, oh, it's like your driver's license. I let it expire. I'll just go and update it. And now this is more like a continuing education credit for certification. Instead, you don't get it by that day. They shut off the thing where you can log in your stuff and, you're out of luck. And so do we want to allow for any flexibility with those numbers or with these specific instances, which I'm sure PT has diligently been tracking?
I do want to note that I checked with host compliance before today's date to see if they had any identified issues with the system where those emails did not go out, and their response was they have nothing identified where there was a failure where those emails did not go out at any point.
Right. And we have tried, so for example, someone had a license and there was a demonstrated contact where they contacted us prior to their expiration, prior to, certain things. And we had an email trail. We had a login. Was it you? We had a login and we could tie it to something. We did issue that renewal or
I get that, and there are some that might need to be adjusted, but, this is a big deal for short-term rental owners, and I would think they would know that date. Like, okay, mine expires on June 15th, by May 15th, I need to get that in there, because I don't want it to expire, because then I'm out of luck.
But if they didn't know the moratorium was coming down the pike, would they have maybe not looked at it as closely? I don't know.
And that's where I'm
Maybe,
looking
yeah.
for some guidance, because I do see both ways. And, as I said, we're working with the ordinances and the moratorium language that we have. But, is there a rationale for saying, perhaps maybe, if your license expired within, and you could pick it, 30, 60, 90 days before the moratorium started or something like that, we would have some flexibility. We could come back with some language, I would think. Don't you think, PT? That would be reasonable, not letting someone who was just lax. Excuse me?
The other example or issue that PT has dealt with is, somebody's license expired, they plan to, there was some reason that they weren't going to rent for 1
that's
year,
right,
but then
that
they were
one
going to
person
re-up
did.
the following year, and so then that's another, situation where it was an unforeseen circumstance, where, they assumed that they could renew that license.
And then you also have the ones that he mentioned that for whatever reason they couldn't qualify either because they didn't have.
They didn't have their CFOs.
They didn't, yeah, exactly. There was 2 of those.
So are we talking a total of 8 with those different scenarios, or what are we looking at?
We could bring something back to you on that, maybe look at those numbers and the potential language tied to them. Some of those issues you mentioned or that Claire mentioned would open up more numbers than others. If you want to take the course of, listen, this is their responsibility, it was expired, it's expired, that's the way it goes, we can do that. If you want to take the approach, there can be some mitigating factors, we can do that as well, and we'll bring back some standards to judge the mitigation by.
Were the short-term rental owners notified in any way that the moratorium was on the agenda?
Not any way other
Than
than
the
just
website.
regular Open Meetings Act
Right.
notification for
Subscribing
meetings.
to
Right.
documents on demand.
Yeah, and not everybody does that or has to do that, or
Or knew about it at the time.
knew about it at the time, yeah.
Okay.
No, there was not like a mass email, correct me if I'm wrong, PT, there was not a mass email to all short-term rental owners about the moratorium. Most did know about it because we had talked about it and it hit the press and there's a network of people and so forth. But that doesn't encapsulate everybody.
So I guess I would say bring back the numbers and your recommendations between the three of you, four of you,
Okay,
and we can look at it.
how does everyone else feel about that?
I think that's fine. You know, we're not doing this to punish
No.
anybody. But on the other hand, there's a group of people out there that did play by the rules and did go out and got the renewals and everything else in place. So I think if it's just a handful or so of people, we can look at each individual type this time, but then that would be the end of it.
Seems
Matt,
reasonable.
yeah.
It does seem reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just like a little bit of, Matt's point, each individual case to know kind of what the situation was around it.
Because I think we're going to set the bar plenty high for them to be there.
But I also think, don't bring us names and
Oh,
addresses.
right,
No.
exactly.
No.
No, it's not tied to whom
No.
it is, it's
So
when
it'll be
they
more the
fail.
situation.
Yeah. I just want to make sure
Agreed.
it's out there.
Yeah,
And we'll
agreed.
work to make sure too that we're doing everything fine legally and what makes sense from administratively and what the board might find palatable. But I needed to know where you were on that spectrum. So I appreciate that. We're jointly appreciative then. Okay. I think we're ready to move on, correct? Okay. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks so much for having me. See you soon.
Congratulations again. Go get some sleep, right?
Thank you so much. I will.
18, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see if it's on the agenda tonight. It's debatable. All right, bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, with that, we will come to the National Flood Insurance Program.
Do you need me for anything else tonight?
Bye, Claire.
Bye, Claire.
Bye, PT. Thank you very much for your work on this, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yes, absolutely.
This is page 156.
186.
And this actually,
I know, mine's so messed up.
this is a lengthy packet to put together, guys. It was. So this is just an introduction. So what happened is, you'll remember, it's been about 4 years almost, 3 years, that they went through and were updating the maps, and then they had draft maps and all of these things. Well, when they started this, we had to update our ordinance, and now that they're finishing it and have accepted the maps, we have to do the very same thing. And you'll remember, we have an agreement with the county that they will, that we have, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm looking for the language here. What's that?
We signed that last document in 2018.
Yep. That we've designated, thank you, I was looking for the word, I was just escaping me, designating construction code as our enforcing agent. And we actually have had one time where we've had to reach out to them for a particular piece of property who was looking for something. So I appreciate their partnership in that. And I have notified them, and there are other townships too where they're going to be getting this at the county level. So once we enact this resolution and ordinance, then that will get sent off to the county.
Because we still have to publish and then have a public hearing on it.
That's right. So this is just a motion to introduce and notice proposed ordinance 2023 and we will go ahead and name it. We're going to leave 7 and 8 for the bottomland potential and do 2023-09.
That's for resolutions,
For a
not for
resolution.
ordinance.
For resolution. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Thank you. Thank you. And this would be their first ordinance.
Our first ordinance of 2023.
Right, right. And the resolution would be 2023-09. So is there, the motions listed on page 187 to introduce and notice the ordinance and resolution?
I make the motion. You want it read?
I think we're okay. It's late, Sue. Motion by S. Cortade, support
Support.
by M. Cortade. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed by no? Okay. We'll get working on that ordinance. And now we come down to what was in the consent calendar.
DC Water.
Let me find the page on this, guys. And if you find it first, feel free to shout out.
Somewhere around 84, 80.
It is on 68. So what this is, you'll recall that there were two bottomland resolutions that were from TC Water Sports both. Now, these properties owned by East Bay Development Group LLC, and then the other one is TC Water Sports LLC and Sugar Beach Resort Partners LLC. And so what this sought to do is, we passed this conveyance just like we did with Alexandra tonight, but then remember, and we haven't done this before, been asked to do it or chosen to do it ourselves or anything, but I think when we looked back and researched resolutions previous, I think it's a good idea. What Eagle passes is not necessarily the dock schematic that we have seen with the bottomland. So this ordinance does nothing in the way of resolving except to acknowledge and receive the final designation that was approved by Eagle. You'll see there's just one resolved there. And on the first resolution, does hereby acknowledge and receives the final configuration of the Great Lakes Bottomland Conveyance submitted by, and then it would say the company, and this one is East Bay Development Group, to the state of Michigan. The Great Lakes Bottomlands to be conveyed are fully described in the final dock permit, and then it gives that permit number. So this will just, from a researching way, allow us with resolutions to easily track and make sure that a bottomland conveyance is tied to the accurate dock that Eagle approved.
Makes sense.
Now, I did have a question today because item 4 is on the agenda as TC Water Sports resolution documenting Eagle-approved bottomland conveyance. And then, of course, these resolutions, one does have the TC Water Sports name in it, but the other one is East Bay Development Group. And so they questioned, whether that was properly noticed. Well, remember, this is a resolution and an agenda item and doesn't require a public hearing nor notification, like something like a planning commission site plan or special land use would, or a special assessment district, any of that.
Well, because technically, all you have to do is the one resolution within 10 days of the New Year's, dating your meeting dates and times.
Right, so because if this were a special meeting, I would have pulled it to the next meeting, but I think that was an honest observation, and I get what they're saying, although we're still properly noticed. But I did want to pull that out and make that clear, instead of just continuing to pass it on the consent calendar. So that's the story behind why it's in front of you, why it was pulled off the consent calendar, and why we're looking for the resolutions to be passed.
These are resolutions 10 and 11.
7 and 8.
I've got a couple of questions. So there was a dock permit with a bottoms lands conveyance that we passed here at the board level in 2021, is that right?
So in 2021, we don't have the permit. We are like the beginning step.
Okay.
And so then they go to Eagle for the permitting. So what we see is their intended dock configuration. It may be changed through their process with Eagle.
Okay.
And so we're taking what the ending permit is and tying that to this resolution, which is tied to the other resolution in the verbiage.
So that we get the ending dock configuration into the township's records, right?
Yep, and through this resolution, 2023-7 or 8, it lists in that resolution that it's looking back to the 2021 resolution. So if someone goes up and pulls this, looks up either Bottomlands or the company or the permit, it's going to pull that up and tie those resolutions together.
So this is an extension of what was already approved?
It's not even an,
A replacement?
nope, it's not a replacement. The dock configuration,
Yeah.
that's what was actually approved by Eagle.
Okay.
And that's what is tied to the drafted resolution.
It's just allowing us to get that into our records, I think, so that we know what Eagle actually allowed them to do in the end.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I wanted to get some clarification is obviously there's been a lot of
Yeah.
a flurry of activity on different boards associated with this property. And I know in some of the meetings that we've had in the past, the workflow from the applicant wasn't always handled in the right sequence. There were, things that were done out of sequencing, were done out of compliance in the past. And, we just had a meeting on this where there was a decision at the ZBA board in January. And it's a strange timing, seeing this in February.
So the reason I like this is because, for example, when we've done bottomland conveyances before, well, the one in 2021, or no, I'm gonna get the dates off, so I'm not gonna go there.
2020.
But an earlier conveyance that we did, it did not populate at all, the earlier conveyance. And so it would have been nice to have that history piece. And so now we would have that. So someone comes back and says, well, this resolution was passed. And this doc doesn't look like what was in the 2020, what was this one, 2021. The doc is different than the 2021. You've done something wrong. Well, no, actually, it was just the process of going through Eagle that changed that, and then we have it in the files.
Right.
And then it should match. Yeah.
So am I not looking, I'm only seeing one resolution.
So the first one's on page 70. So the way we ordered it was we have the draft resolution, followed by the resolution it's being tied to, followed by the Eagle permit that's tied to it, and then again for the second one.
Okay, thank you.
So,
There it
again,
is.
I'm sorry, I'm just struggling. Maybe my mind is polluted with all of the board packet material from.
Well, and it's
the
10 o'clock, too.
It's probably making me a little bit vague. I don't understand what the conveyance is, and the difference between what was done in 2021 versus now. I apologize,
No, that's okay.
I'm not following.
There's no conveyance. We're not doing, this resolution is not going to Eagle for the purposes of a conveyance.
Okay.
A bottom line conveyance. This resolution, while it may get copied to the owners, the neighbors, the Eagle, it may go there. This is for our purposes to
To tie it to the dock.
tie to the correct dock, which was eventually approved by Eagle.
Okay.
Again, where you have to look at the whereases, all the whereases do is just set the stage, right? They're not what we're doing. The magic in a resolution is the resolved clauses. And so you'll notice the resolve says, does hereby acknowledge and receive. As a matter of fact, when I first received this resolution, it said, East Bay Charter Township does hereby approve the final configuration, da-da-da. And I said, no, we're not going there. We're not approving because we're not going back and looking through it and say, and it's not our purpose. We're not asked to do that by Eagle, nor the applicant, nor anybody. What we are doing is acknowledging that that's what the permit is, and we're receiving it.
Okay. I can live with acknowledge. That I can understand.
So I actually have this in one motion, which I think is fine.
I think so.
And again, that would be 7 and 8.
Just so you know, the other resolution starts on 84.
Yes, I found it. Thank you.
84.
Yes.
Yes.
I had to go through all the math.
I know. I kept digging.
And I saw it when I initially read it, but it's 10 o'clock.
Trust me, if you think it's fun going through all of these, you should try going through all the files and trying to get everything in order. Okay. Is there a,
I'll move to approve Resolution 2307 and 08, resolutions acknowledging the final conveyance of Great Lakes bottomlands for 2155 and 1773 US 31 North.
okay, is there support?
I'll support it.
Motion made by M. Cortate, support by Bartlett. Further discussion? And those are good questions. Thank you for having us go through that so everyone's very clear on what this does and doesn't do. Appreciate that. Ann, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Sure. M. Cortate?
Yes.
Bartlett?
Yes.
S. Cortate?
Yes.
Cook?
No.
Friend?
Yes. Okay. Help me out here, guys, because I have notes all over this agenda, but I do believe we're done.
I believe we are at number 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Agenda items, though.
Public comment.
Yeah? Okay, public comment. How are you? Hi, Bruce.
Yes, Elvis.
Bruce Moore, 3363 Summer
Oh.
Drive. As you look on the short-term rental ordinance, you had a lot of discussion about a lottery versus first come, first serve, and I would encourage you to go the lottery route for the simple reason that what it sounds like the demand would be somebody that has a fiber optic connection and a fast router is going to have a huge advantage over someone who's got a cable connection and a home router.
Or dial-up.
Or DSL, and in East Bay Township, I don't think we have any fiber connections.
Yeah, we do,
So,
but that's okay.
thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely, thank you. All right, any other public comments, Sally? Thank you for bringing that to my attention, though. I appreciate that, thank you. Okay, upcoming meeting dates, guys. Next month, we are on the 13th as well. So we'll see you here March 13th. And we'll have the short-term rentals will be on the agenda. We will have a hefty agenda again in March. So just be forewarned. We'll try to keep it as tailored as we can. And hopefully, the cover pages and the attachments help you, because that's what it's intended to do, to make it a little more streamlined here at the meeting. All right, with that, if there's no objections, we stand adjourned. Have a good evening, everybody.